All right, Matt, you starting?
Okay, so it works better to get that
Oh,
switch.
Here, this one works. Yours is
Test,
been
test.
used.
Switch on, Matt?
Yes, it is. All right, so we're going back into it. Find my thing.
Testing 1, 2. Yes, call it for a while.
All right, so calling for a clock. Jack, you're still on the hook here.
Am I still on?
Yes.
Oh, well, then we'll continue on. So we do have some new language that's been written in here from Mike on calling the clock. And as you can see, that's now in red. We have a clock will be approved only after a reasonable time has passed. Any player in the event may request a clock, and if the floor approves the request, a player has up to 50 seconds to make a decision. If action is not taken before time expires, there will be a 10-second count. Should be countdown, count. If the player has not acted by the end of the countdown, the hand is dead. A tie goes to the player. The TD may reduce the time allowed to make a decision and take other steps as necessary to fit the format of the game and stop persistent delays. See also Rule 62. Does anyone have any comments about the new proposed additional language? We need to get a microphone to you guys.
I forgot in regards to a reasonable time, we've had this come up quite often in our tournaments where players feel like they were not given a reasonable time. So when players ask us in regards to whether or not things are reasonable, would the board consider something like maybe a 10% of whatever the level is? So if you're running a 20-minute level tournament, we'd say 2 minutes to act is reasonable. 30 minutes, a percentage of the level. Would you guys consider putting that more into specific terms?
I don't know that we would ever want to nail it down to a specific time. Like, I've tried to always say that at least 2 minutes being a reasonable amount of time, but again, the situation's different when your blind levels are 20s or maybe 10s, or could be 2 hours, depending on the event. So I think the discretion at that point for the tournament director, and that's part of our job, is to see and be able to gauge the pace of the game. If someone's taking too long to act on their hand, so on and so forth, and you get to make that decision. I think that's what's important, and that's what the nuance of this rule is, that the floor gets to decide, hey, I feel like, and I know it's a lot of power, but I feel like a reasonable amount of time has been taken or it hasn't.
Let me add to that, Kelly. We added the verbiage about to fit the format of the game so that if it's a turbo, maybe you're doing 10 or 15-minute rounds, then a reasonable amount of time is not going to be the same as if you're doing 2-hour rounds. And also, I think everyone here is well-versed to know that in round one of a tournament, if you're looking at 1% of your stack that someone's bet, that a reasonable amount of time would not be 5 minutes, but perhaps, you know, in the at the final table, you know, a decision for all your chips, a reasonable amount of time might be 3 or 4 minutes or whatever it is. So that's why we can't really define what reasonable is, because it's really dependent on the situation.
And I think also
it's
to
pre or
that,
post.
well, there's one other piece too, the bubble too. I think the bubble is also an important time when this particular rule is in play, because you got guys that want to stall at their tables. So I know, Neil, you've had some issues with some big tournaments like that as well, but you know, we'll make that clock speed up a little bit if we need to.
The one thing I want players to know, though, I was reading on one of the forums where someone said, I paid my money and I can take my time every time I want. You know, that is not what you have to allow, that, you know, a reasonable amount of time. And once somebody has been warned, you have the discretion, if necessary, to cut down on the time. So anyone who says, I can take all the time I want, is not true.
Yeah, I mean, this for me, I personally, by making it a rule that the floor can call the clock, I think the bulk of players would turn around and eventually it would become our responsibility. The same way string raises moved from everybody at the table had to call it. Now, I don't know anywhere where the floor and the dealer, or where the dealer isn't the one calling the string raise. It would absolve the players of the responsibility of owning the clock that they paid for. And I think it's ripe for abuse. I don't think anybody has a problem trusting Matt Savage or Jack to know when it's time to call the clock. But random floor person at Casino X, there might be a problem. And there's also ulterior motivations to maybe it's a 10-table room and they need those tables for cash games. So they're going to start speeding up that clock. My concern is we can already call the clock with rule number 1. We already every tournament director has that power. Rule 1, if it's being abused, you can call it. The rest of the time, to me, it is still incumbent upon the players. And the floor person should walk up. We actually had a great video from EPT Vienna where this happened with Nick O'Hara, who walked up and asked the dealer, said, how much time has passed on a Gus Hansen all-in? And the dealer responded, not enough. And so he gave him another minute and a half and then put the clock on him. But to me, it's just all communication. And the players own the clock. They paid the fee. It's their tournament. If they want to let this guy go in the tank for 20 minutes, now maybe we have a responsibility to step in, but what are the other 8 people at the table doing while that guy's in the tank for 20 minutes? That's what I don't understand. I would call the clock. Dan Unigrano has a great rule for this. He gives you one chance. Then if he sees you tanking in level 3 and level 4, he starts calling the clock. And he's very open and tells the players, I'm sorry, I believe you're taking too much time. And so I'm going to start calling the clock on you. To me, that just seems, it's the players' tournament. It's their clock.
I think possibly the definition of reasonable, too, can be determined by the players at that given table. Most of the time when you walk up to a table to make a clock decision, if you have trouble or are not sure, the reactions of the players at that table are going to guide you in that direction most of the time. There's generally consensus by those players. If they're like, no, why'd you call the clock on that guy? Then obviously at that point there probably hasn't been enough time. But also, there's the other side of that. When you walk up and somebody calls the clock and nobody at the table objects, chances are pretty good that it was a reasonable amount of time. So letting the players at that table guide that decision is pretty helpful.
I have a question dealing with the second sentence. By the way, I'm Dan Funk with the Casino Bicycle. Any player in the event. Now, normally we handle that with any player at the table because the other tables are continuing action anyway. The only time I would consider any player in the event would be in a hand-for-hand situation where all the tables are waiting and the blinds are continuing to run. Do you really think it should be any player in the event can call?
I think there's more situations than just the bubble. I think that you have the bubble before making the final table, especially in a big tournament like the main event or the one drop or something, where it could be extra critical about being fair and playing at a reasonable speed, especially if you get 3 or 4 guys that decide they're just going to stop playing because they have all the chips, or guys the other way. They're going to keep playing, and the ones that have the short stacks are going to stop playing. So I think that any player in the event should have a responsibility to the event, to everyone else, to be able to call the clock. I think it's reasonable, and I think it's up to us to decide whether or not that clock should actually be called, or if we should be able to impose, on everyone in the tournament, hey, you guys need to start, acting accordingly. You need to start playing at a better pace. It's not fair to everyone in the tournament. And I've even gone so far in tournaments like Mega Satellites where I'm paying, 10 or 15 seats, where I've redrawn the field, or even played one table in one side of the room, one table in another side of the room, or even split them up in rooms so they can't even see what the other table's doing, so they can't even get there. And so I'll take whatever precautions necessary to ensure certain players don't start teaming up on others.
And
Well,
I had the
normally-
same question as you to the board when this was written in, and the answer that satisfied me was the second part of the sentence, and if the floor approves the request. So in other words, any player can ask, but the floor can say no, not at this time. This table's going to be the only one. So you still have some discretion there.
Yeah, that does make sense. Normally the way we would handle it is if somebody from another table said these guys are stalling, we would watch and make sure action proceeded at a reasonable pace, just to solve that issue. But I was just curious the way the wording was there.
That's why the floor has to approve.
All right, thank you.
Hi, Danny Anton, Boulder Station, first time here. The second sentence where it says, and take other steps necessary to fit the format of the game, what other steps have been discussed to hopefully possibly include penalties for guys who are excessively stalling? Jack, I don't mean to pick on you, but that guy who made it on TV last year when he's trying to bump up in the money bubble in the main and just stalled, and he had aces, I think, once installed. I mean, are there penalties being discussed for that to really put the kibosh on this?
Well, that's what I was trying to explain over here, where, we might separate an event or maybe even redraw the entire field if we feel that there are enough players making an unfair playing field for others. So, yes, we can take reasonable steps, whatever those happen to be that we deem as being reasonable at the time, to ensure that, players are playing. And somebody stalling, you can always put on the rail. I mean, I would do that because it does affect everyone else in the tournament. And, if they miss a few hands and they lose a few chips, I think that might get their attention. So.
And as a rule, I can tell you that we have, at the Beau Rivage, we have actually penalized players for repeated stalling and put them on the rail for 10 hands. That stops the problem really quick, I'll just tell you that. So.
It's in everybody's best interest to keep the game going. I mean, when it really comes down to the matter.
So I have a concern about requiring that the floor approve the request. Our dealers are trained to administer the clock when a player calls the clock. And
Where are you from?
From Playground Poker Club in Montreal, or just outside of Montreal. And our dealers are perfectly well trained, and they administer the clock when a player calls it. And the countdown of 60 seconds starts immediately, as long as in the dealer's estimation it is reasonable. And so a 1 minute clock is a 1 minute clock. It's not a 3 minute clock waiting for the TD to show up or the floor to show up. It's a 1 minute clock, administered exactly the same as every other procedure, but it starts instantly. For us, this is tied in intrinsically with the whole idea of not tanking and reducing the stigma for a player to call clock on somebody as required, which helps reduce the whole tanking issue as well.
Now, is the dealer using judgment, or is it just another player calling the clock and then the dealer just starting the clock, where they're not having any actual say-so or discretion on whether or not it should be issued?
The dealer uses judgment, and they're well trained in this aspect of it. And dealers will refuse a clock routinely if not enough time has passed. But if enough time has passed, they will commence the clock immediately.
I could not imagine a dealer in one of my events, let's say like the one drop or something, calling the clock on a player. I think that dealer would probably lose his life.
Hang on. No. The dealer does not call the clock. Yeah. The dealer administers the clock. A player has to call the clock.
But you just said that the dealer has discretion on whether or not to actually initiate the clock, correct? Isn't that what you said?
No. Deciding whether a reasonable amount of time has passed.
That's what I'm saying. So he's got the discretion, so he can look at the person that's been, maybe it's later in the tournament, early in the tournament, whatever, and decide whether or not he wants to start that clock.
No,
right?
only if a player has requested it. A player has to request the clock.
I would never give the dealer the control to do something like that. Just my opinion, but it's my opinion.
Exactly.
But I don't just ask the dealers. I look at and I ask the players too. So it's not just the dealers. So when any of those situations. But again, and it's about us being able to assess it and taking the onus off the dealer. The dealer has to give you the information, but you have to make the decision. And sometimes the dealer's information is not enough. You always ask the dealer first, and then you consult with the table to ensure that you have all the information, because sometimes the dealer misses it. And like Linda said, you might have a bad tipper or something, or a good tipper or whatever, and that could influence the action.
I think it's great that in your card room, you have trained your dealers and you trust your dealers enough to, to allow them to decide if it's reasonable. But, overall, is in a general thing, I really wouldn't want a dealer to be the one to determine if it's a reasonable amount of time or not.
Yeah, the simplest thing is just ask the dealer how much time has taken place, and they can give you if they say 2 minutes, you decide 2 minutes is fair, then 2 minutes is fair. If they say only a minute and a half, you can say, all right, enough time hasn't passed, I'm going to give you 2 more minutes to think about it, and then I'm going to start 60 seconds.
Right, but since you're asking the dealer for their opinion, don't you agree that he's saving time? You're already pressed for time, and time for you guys is one of your biggest headaches. I'm guessing the new stalling stuff that's going on.
Well, that's why we were talking about observing tables, watching them, and
right, but the
sometimes
you're going to go to, right, Jack? I mean,
yeah, you're gonna ask, but again,
but
here's what I've seen, and this is what typically happens: is that when you go to the dealer, and the dealer says it's been a reasonable amount of time, the players in the game say, "Man, this is we're in a real serious spot here in the tournament here, and I think the guy should have time. I mean, I don't know if he should really be called, and we can use our discretion at that point to say whether or not we want to give the guy a clock, or as the other situation was, give him another minute, and then call the clock because we're standing there observing it. So every situation you have to be able to fill out, and
Totally agree.
still you have to make that call and say yes, you should get a clock or not. But the tournament director should be asking the right questions. That's the other thing.
And 9
100%.
players can immediately step up and overrule the dealer, in
Correct.
which case the tournament director is going to say, well, obviously, if all 9 players think he has not had enough, then they know what's been going on at the table, that it's an appropriate amount of time that he's taking at that point.
So really, it's just a question of the dealer training and trust, because the dealer, I'm sure, is going to go, does everybody think he's had an ample amount of time? And if you're
I
saving a
know
minute
that
or
if I'm in
two.
a tournament and somebody calls for the clock and the tournament director comes over, I'm going to give him this or that, And there's probably somebody at the table or many people at the table who will indicate, whether or not it's been sufficient time.
All right.
It
It just seems like if time is the biggest concern, that you're wasting a minute or two waiting for the TD to come over, because they have a whole bunch of tables to watch out for, so.
I think
just
it's
my
roughly the
thought.
same as any other floor call you're going to have. When you walk up to the table, essentially your first point of contact is always going to be the dealer, but part of that whole interaction is going to be finding out the information from the players as well. Same thing as calling the clock. You're going to ask the dealer, but you're going to
Look at the players when it's in the process. Yeah. And that's just part of, making a lot of these decisions and being in touch with the situation and be able to walk up and kind of get a feel for it. So, any other questions about calling for a
Right.
clock?
So that goes into the whole thing of tanking and what can be done about it. Obviously, in my opinion, it's the biggest problem in poker we have today. And as you can see, as what's going on this summer, it's not getting any better. Matter of fact, it's getting worse. So if anybody had any opinion on what could be done to stop that, and don't say shot clock because it's not as easy as everybody thinks it is to do that, but even 30 seconds for every decision is too long, in my opinion. So when you say shot clock, I think that lends to other problems, but obviously tanking is an issue. One of the things that's come up is, should the floor be able to call the clock? Should the floor be able to call the clock after the players have called on it once? Or, what do we do to get the players to make sure that they're calling the clock? And maybe we can have a player talk about that.
I think you put the guy on the rail that's actually causing the issue, and you do that enough times, and people start acting at a reasonable pace. Got questions? Go ahead, Matt.
Matt Stout again. I think Savage and I have agreed on this for a while. It's a matter of players taking it upon themselves to call a clock and getting rid of the stigma that's associated with it. I call a very large number of clocks, especially lately, and I'm friends with Jordan Christos, and I called him a clock on him 8 times in one day in a 2,700 Borgata event, because there were spots where we were playing 70, 80 big blinds effective. The hijack would limp in. He'd be on the button and tank for 2 minutes before he decides whether or not to raise and how much, which is just completely out of control. So, there definitely does need to be a lot of discretion. Like pre-flop, I don't think it should be 2 minutes. And things like that. I think you guys are doing the right thing in terms of making it a little bit, giving a little bit of leeway in terms of what's reasonable, but I think the onus is on us as players to call the clock, because having a shot clock is just too bad for recreational players, and if it's bad for recreational players, it's bad for the game, and it's bad for the pros.
And it's up to the
It's
players.
on us. I think it's our job to do it.
Agreed. And to give us information. When we need it, and not just clam up and then after we make the wrong decision, walk off and say, "Oh." So, well, if you guys would have given us that information, then we would have had it. And sometimes people don't want to speak up, and that's why I think that it's important for everyone to protect each other, so in these situations we can make the best decision.
Yeah, socially you can definitely make for an awkward situation. There's a player who is making a decision for a large percentage of his stack, and I make these decisions a lot more frequently. I do it for a living, but at the same time, we play 2 hands a minute, and if someone goes into the tank for 3, 4, 5 minutes deep in a tournament, we're going to play 2, 3 less hands because of that player's decision that one specific time. And if he keeps doing it, we're at a disadvantage to the rest of the field, who are playing more hands, have more of an opportunity to chip up, and are going to be more likely than I am to make the final table, even all other things equal. So I think it's just on the players to start calling a lot more clocks and to eventually break down the stigma of it by doing it on our own.
Something else that you said earlier, though, was that you called the clock on somebody 8 times, whether that's facetious or not. There certainly should, okay, well, in that case, then.
I'm friends with him.
That really directs my point, that any player who has had the clock called on him 8 times in one day, the tournament director's not doing his job.
No,
because
Tab did his job perfectly. Tab told him that he was going to decrease it by 15 seconds every time, and that it would get
Okay,
down
so
to the
he
point
got
where
down
he's
to
only
having
going to
to make
have
instantaneous.
30 seconds or less to make his
He's
decision.
a
Okay.
very tough
Then
player to
that's
deal
fine.
with.
Yeah, he absolutely
Because
is.
I-
better, but
Tab knew I'm friends with
Jordan
him.
can be a real problem.
Right, but 8 times for one player, there's a problem.
Yeah, it's out of control. The whole table was furious
He likes
about
to
it.
pace himself, let's put it
Yeah,
that way.
he was partially trying to tell.
Late red.
He's partially trying to tell people, and Tab did his job. He stood over the table and just stood there watching every decision, seeing personally how long it was
Seething.
taking.
Good.
Yeah. So Tab,
I
Tab did a
do
great
think
job
that
on that.
players are their own worst enemies a lot. They don't want to get involved by calling the clock on a player. They're afraid to, I don't want to get involved in this hand. So if players do call it, it would make it a lot easier on us. But there's a lot of times where I'll be going, my God, how long are these guys going to let this go? And it's 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, and none of the players want to seem to get involved in it. And eventually, there will be a decision, but it takes way too long, and players need to start policing their own game.
One thing that you can also do that I think is really, really key and important and goes back to training the staff and training the dealers is you don't see this a lot, and sometimes in really big events it can be very tough. The communication from dealer to dealer as the push goes through of saying like number 8's been warned about not speaking English, or number 5's had a penalty for calling the clock or something. If as the floor rotate, I don't know how many floor Jack has at the World Series, but later on in the evening, the guy might not know it's the 3rd time the clock's been called, and there might be 5 new players at the table, and the other ones are on their headphone or not paying attention. But if throughout the day the dealers keep saying, hey, there's been a warning here, there's been a warning, that information stays relevant to the people who are actually enforcing the tournament. The same way as you say on a cash game, so-and-so's at dinner, so-and-so's coming back and went to the restroom, he'll be back in 5 minutes. Yeah, same with abuse warnings. That information is important if your dealers are really good at passing it along to the dealer that's pushing in.
The comment is that the floors also should be passing along that information from floor man to floor man or shift to shift or whatever. We want to let people know what's going on at that table. This guy has already walked up to the line 3 times, hasn't quite crossed over, so that the next person who has to make a ruling, the guy's not getting a fresh sheet. He already knows this guy has the history with that player. It's the same type of idea.
Ken?
My name's Ken Lambert, Heartland Poker Tour. Something that I've learned in a lot of my experience with tournaments is our own staff and our dealers don't even know when you ask them what's a reasonable amount of time. They really don't know. So I have found that educating my staff, dealers and floor, will help that process, will speed that process up. So when you go to the table, the dealer's fully aware of what you're asking him and what reasonable amount of time really is. So I think we start there. I think that helps the process.
That's great, yeah.
Okay, so it looks like we don't have any consensus on anything we can do formally, so let's move to the next one.
We need
All
to
right.
get a vote.
Yeah, we do need to get a vote on.
Do you think that maybe we should put that in Rule 2? Under player responsibilities, like explicitly state that players should be calling clock. It actually contributes to
I actually
orderly
have thought
tournament.
about that because when we changed and included when we see the pot's going to be pushed the wrong way, and a lot of times people didn't want to speak up, and then we wrote in the rules that players are encouraged to make sure that the dealer's not making a mistake. And I thought, well, maybe we should put in there players are encouraged to call the clock if somebody's taking too much time, but then that might go on the other. It's like you're not sure if that's going to make it tilt to the other side too much. Where
Right,
they're,
'cause Rule 2
Wait, I'm calling the clock. It's my.
Rule 2 states that players should follow proper etiquette, and a lot of players think that calling a clock is an etiquette violation. It's actually uncouth to do so. So maybe if we put that explicitly in the rules, that players should be
We'd
calling
have
a
to
clock.
find the right wording for it. But,
Right.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It could be under this section that,
Steve?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. What I was going to say, based on Matt Stout's use of the word stigma, it's a great word to describe the situation that's been going on, is most of you guys make a startup announcement with important rules, basically cell phone use. You could consider adding that to that announcement as part of the player education campaign.
I like that.
All right. Anything else on calling for a clock? So, Mike, did you make notes about possibly
Jack,
in the procedural? Okay.
They were just saying about adding it to rule number 2, Kevin again here from the Gardens. I think it falls under that generally contribute to an orderly event. I mean, I think we have it there already generally, so.
We have it in there generally, but I think to Steve's point that as part of the opening, there's few things that we always tell guys that are important, and I think it may even be even more general than just saying when it comes to a clock, but the fact that players should be able to protect each other, and by doing that, it's not limited to anything, but could include calling the clock, calling disruptive behavior, whatever. Obviously, you don't want to create a scenario where everybody's tattletaling on everybody, but everybody has a mutual respect at the table. This is what this game should be all about.
I think if we're continually tanking, we're not generally contributing to an orderly tournament.
Correct. Yep. Agreed. Yep.
Hello, Kevin Pound here. At the API Summit in February, Somerville, Motion, Carrera, Daniel Negreanu, Bernard Lee they were talking about the subject, and Daniel Negreanu actually brought up a concept of possibly having that player that with excessive tanking, if they end up folding their hand, actually exposing their hand as a penalty. I don't know if that's too much of a concept at the beginning, or if this is going to cover it because it is basically penalizing them, but that's a possible penalty.
The only thing I hate about, guy tanking and then exposing his hand is that what happens in the situation where there's still other action pending and other people, and an exposed hand could affect the outcome, which I don't like. Obviously, if you want to punish a player, expose his hand. Obviously, you see what they do to me about having to show one to get the pot. I mean, let alone making them do it to, as a penalty for not acting right. I just don't know that it would ever fly, but, we can move on. Yep, time on the
Are we
railways.
okay with adding this language? Anybody not okay with adding this language?
Going once, going twice. We're good? All right, let's move on. Number 28, rabbit hunting. I don't even know if we even talk about this anymore, but no rabbit hunting is allowed. Rabbit hunting is revealing any cards that would have come if the hand had not ended. Everybody's good? Matt? I think we're good. This should be my last one, right? This one will be easy, right? This should be easy. I'm going to turn this one. Steve, you got one last.
Related
we almost
to rabbit
made
hunting,
it. We almost
a lot
made
of
it.
players, including professional players, are unaware that it should be illegal. I guess it's illegal. Maybe it's not. To look at dead hands, like a hand of a player who's absent, and as you know or should know, that information can, in some rare cases, be really important as to what those cards are.
Yeah, but that comes into etiquette. You don't touch another player's cards. You don't mess with somebody's chips. You don't do anything like that.
If you make it a rule with a penalty that you can't do that.
Well, we could enforce a penalty on repeated etiquette violations. That is within our rights in the rules. I mean, again, I think that if they did it once and we told them not to do it, I don't know, to me it's probably severe enough. And if they did it twice and put them on the rail, I don't think they would do it again. So I think it's, yeah. If you're playing in a game where they're looking at other people's cards, you're probably in a pretty soft game, right? This is in my events, right? Okay, yeah. Yeah. Doing
Steve,
a good job with marketing.
Under etiquette that, touching somebody else's cards. So, I think it's covered there.
All right, guys, we're going to move on. All right, so number 29, at your seat. Now, a player must be at his seat when the first card is dealt on the initial deal or his hand is dead. Of course, this is a non-WSOP rule at the moment. A player not then at his seat is dealt in. He may not look at his cards, and the hand is immediately killed after the initial deal. His blinds and antes are posted, and if dealt the stud bring-in card, he posts the bring-in. A player must be at his seat to call time. At your seat means within reach of your chair. This rule is not intended to condone players being out of their seats while in a hand. Instead, house rules may require additional cards be dealt to the killed hand in some situations. So, number 29, player survey. So this is this the Dan O'Brien survey, or is this our survey?
This is not my survey.
This is not your survey. Okay. So TDA did a survey on whether or not people liked being at your seat when the first card off or last card off or no preference. And 23.8% said they strongly prefer first card off the deck. 10.7% prefer first card off the deck but can live with last card off the deck. 7.7% said both work, they don't have a preference. And then 16.1% prefer last card off the deck but can live with first card off the deck. And then 41.6% strongly prefer last card off the deck, which is slightly higher than strongly prefer first card off the deck. So with that said, I know the board has gone back and forth in terms of whether or not this should be a rule or a recommended house procedure. So what's the best way to start this off, Matt?
Well, first of all, Jack has decided that he would not change the way he does it and still stick with last card off the deck. And
Yeah,
Neil
I failed to mention that.
has decided that he's actually the one that introduced it to the TDA last year, that he would stick with first card off the deck. So that kind of leaves me in the middle, not caring much about this rule at all, but taking all the heat for it. So that's kind of what's happened, is that they've kind of left me out there.
You're such a politician, Matt.
Hell to be popular.
Yeah. To be honest, I don't care.
Okay.
And so the fact that I don't care, and I've seen it work with first card off the deck, and I've seen it work with last card off the deck, the question has come up, should it be a rule? Now, for me, I would like everybody in the TDA to do the same thing. Now, we all sat in this room 2 years ago and agreed to use first card off the deck and to give it a try and to try it out. Those that have used it haven't had any problems with it. Those that haven't changed it, Jack hasn't had any problems with it. So the question is what do we do for the TDA?
Can I ask a question real quick? Who did this survey?
This was done through our TDA website.
Through the
You guys?
TDA website.
Yeah.
Why don't you just do it with what the people prefer? I mean, if it ever is undecided or something, just go with what.
Because Neil's not going to change.
So,
First off, it's not Neil. I represent like half a dozen different tournament directors and significant floor. It's not my rule. I didn't even bring it to Stars. It came from one of our tournament directors. But we do believe it's a better rule operationally and generally. I wrote a huge blog. We all discussed it in 2013. The question I have on the survey to your specific question is, this surveyed, what was it, Mike, 170 people? 170 people out of a player base of hundreds of thousands globally. And you can even look at it, I think if on the slide it's what, about 56 to 33 with 7% that don't care, the Matt Savage section. To me, it's not a broad enough cross-section of all the players. If this is 170 people and 3 of them are from outside the United States, how does that impact what we're doing on the EPT or the LAPT or the APPT?
One of the things that I really was excited about with this, the TDA being formed, was the uniformity. And maybe there's a way that you guys can agree before, the responses, that you figure out some way to do some sort of survey or poll and all agree to abide by what the majority of poker players want.
If it's 50, I'll give you a perfect example. When PokerStars went to change its payouts before EPT 9, I believe, we surveyed 1,600 players in Europe. 10%, 12.5%, 15%. We got 33, 33, 33. Almost on the nose, 33, 33, 33. So what do we do? Because whatever we do, we're going to piss off 66% of the players. Well, but what I mean is, if we do a survey and it came down 50.5 and 49.5, do you just go even in here when Matt's asking for a consensus and says how many people believe in the rule? If it looks like only 60% of the room says that they're going to do it, we don't implement the rule and we just move on and say the houses continue to do what they choose to do.
that's not good enough to adopt a rule. So.
Well, even even a follow-up question would be, of the people surveyed, and I know, Dan, you did an extensive survey as well at the World Series last year, I believe. Have those people played a first card off the deck tournament? Like, that would be one of my first questions. If they say, no, I prefer last card, have they ever played a first card? I don't know how many, but I mean, that's why I say the methodology for the survey, if we were able to do a big one, that would be fantastic.
Most foreign-speaking people didn't take the survey, and they use first card. So here's what's going to happen, okay? We can either spend the next hour discussing this, or we can leave it as house policy. And there's slides for each one of these four. But after we discuss it for an hour, we're going to realize that we can't come to a consensus, and we're going to say leave it as house policy.
I vote house policy.
And as much as I want standardized rules like you do, there are some things that we just can't agree on, things like electronics. Those things are house policy because everybody has different things. And so this is one of those things that we're not going to be able to come to an agreement on.
And I don't know that...
An overwhelming agreement.
I don't know that you guys have to, because you guys represent...
It's not just us, it's...
the poker community. So,
yeah.
Again, I say there's a way that you can get a poll that's going to be more than 177 people and agree no matter what it is. If it's 51%, you go this way. If it's 78%, you go that way. And do what the players actually want, because that's the idea behind this, right?
Okay, so they can have house policy. In other words, wherever they play, they can talk to their card room manager and they can say, we want this, and the card room manager or the tournament director can do it that way.
Right.
So we're not trying to say you can't do it this way.
All right.
I think William from Squam Casino in San Diego. We've already established that anybody can take exception with any of the TDA rules, go with house policy. But I think to the gentleman's point, a lot of these rules are what the majority would like to go forward with certain house policies maybe being the exception. Why can't one or the other, the majority, be decided on, and then those that don't agree go with whatever their house policy is?
Because, okay, I probably...
We're not going to come to a unanimous decision, obviously.
In the last year, I've visited probably 70 card rooms, and it's almost 50-50 what they're doing out there. So we really don't want to have a rule that 50%, that half of the people aren't following. It's better to make it do what the house wants to do, what their players want to do.
I'd like to add my 2 cents in the ring. Brian Vickers, Hollywood again. If anyone was here at the 2013 Summit, you might have seen that no one in the room was more against first card off the deck than I was. I was on the mic for about 5 minutes arguing against the practicality of it from a dealer point of view, in that as a former dealer, I finished dealing the cards out, I look around and see who was in their seat, scooping the cards. So while I appreciated the benefit of the rule, and what it was trying to accomplish, I didn't think that it was practical. Then I was here on day 2, and by a pretty good margin, all the tournament directors that were here and all the managers voted yes for that rule. And then half of them went home and said, nah, I'm not going to do it. But I went to my property, and it was voted in, it was a rule, and I reluctantly put it into place. And by the end of the first day of that tournament, I'm now probably the biggest proponent on the forums of this rule. So first thing I want to say is, has anyone who is drastically against this tried to adopt it? Just, that's a rhetorical question, don't answer it, but have you tried to adopt it first? The benefit of this rule, the reason for the rule was so that when a player's coming back to their seat and they're coming back late from smoking, or they're out of their seat gossiping or sweating the action on their table, especially near the bubble, that player wouldn't have an opportunity to walk behind every other player who's looking at their first or second card, sit down in their seat, and possibly have seen a player's hand. That player at the table shouldn't have to protect their hand from a player who's not even at the table. If you're a tournament director, if you're a floor, you walk around the room, table to table, you see everyone's hand. So if someone's walking back to their seat, they could have seen everyone's hand and sat down with a live hand. That was the reason for the rule, if I'm not mistaken. But as a tournament director, in a fairly small room that's fairly cramped, the immediate benefit was that as a floor, when I was trying to make a floor ruling, I didn't have players in my way. They were in their seat. When I was carrying racks and racks of chips, walking around at tables doing color-ups, there was no one in my way. They were at their seat. So it immediately generated a more orderly tournament. When the break was almost over and the clock hit 0, there was no stampede of players rushing back to their seat because they knew it was already too late. So they walked back to their seats in an orderly time if they already missed the timer. And any former dealers know you might be in a spot where players that you like, that you have a good relationship with, is walking back to their seat and they say, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. And you kind of slow down the deal and you do one of those things. And then that other player's running back and you muck his hand real quick. So you're not in that spot as a dealer where you might slow down the deal. It's a lot harder to get away with at the start. You cut the deck and you're just kind of, oh, he's running back. And then you start dealing. Like it's a lot harder to get away with. So I just want to say that, again, I was the biggest opponent of this rule when it was proposed. We passed it by a pretty overwhelming majority. And then what happened, guys? I mean, we're here, we voted yes, and then we said, no, I'm not going to do it. Why not? I mean, did you try to instill it in your room and did it fail? And then you went back to the old way? Or did you just, change your mind when you got home? Did you?
I think players started complaining, and that's what happened.
Well, I think also.
If I may, just on
I had 0 complaints in my room.
Some of the 60% of players. We actually did a survey, as Ed alluded to, which was unbiased, just randomly picking out people that were playing the Millionaire Maker and the main event last year at the World Series. And we actually got 65% in favor of last card, 23 in favor of first card, and the rest were don't know, don't care. And it wasn't me handing them out. We had girls hand them out that didn't know any better, so it was a well-done survey. And I think it's, sorry, models.
Go, buddy. You didn't sound like
Not professional players or, biased people. Apologies.
Good job.
Thank you. Sorry, I lost. You guys got me there. But basically, as a player, and I think maybe this is, like Tab was mentioning, part of what happened, is and I like to go play poker tournaments and play the hands that are dealt to me as long as I'm not obstructing the game. And I don't want my hands killed without a good reason. And I know that we mentioned that, people can walk behind, but, that is extremely rare and very difficult to do since, like we said, it only takes about 5 or 10 seconds to deal out 2-card round. In order to actually see someone's cards, run back around the table as if it were a game of duck, duck, goose and get there in time to be able to play your hand is really difficult. And of course, you need to protect your hand. And also this rule doesn't really do anything to protect the real, or to stop the real issue. And the number one person that can see your cards is the guy that's next to you and standing up. And that guy can still be standing up next to you and still see your cards. So it's really on players to protect their hands. And like I said, I don't know why we're taking this extra step to kill hands that just don't need to be killed. And from an administrative standpoint, I understand it's probably a little bit easier if maybe we're just always in our seats as players. But as a player, I don't really care. I come there to be social and play the poker tournament. And I'm sorry if I'm up out of my seat every now and then, but I'm a paying customer. And I think it's entirely reasonable for me to be able to play hands that you guys have no business killing. So yeah, please.
I have a few points to sort of reiterate what this gentleman said. My name's Scott. I'm from New Hampshire, and we adopted the first card last year after the summit, and a lot of players didn't like it at first. So there's obviously a lot of backlash whenever you change a rule. But one of the things as a tournament director, when we adopt TDA rules, when players don't like a ruling that goes against them, we can always hang our hat on, well, it's a TDA rule. That's what we go by. To leave it up to house policy, it makes it very difficult, first of all, to be a TDA room. You're making up your own rules as you go. But the first card rule, it seems inconsistent to go last card and then go anti-tanking to try to speed up the game. Part of what this helps is making sure that people are in their seats and contribute to an orderly tournament that is quick. And also with the first card rule, the surveys, none of them have any answers for how players feel about a dealer slowing down to make sure this player gets his big blind, but then they don't because the dealer doesn't know them. Part of making poker a better game for all of us is bringing in new players. And if they feel like some players are getting favoritism, they don't want to play anymore. So I think that's another reason why first card off the top of the deck is an important rule for us to adopt and to stick with.
And while the players may prefer the other way, as a player, I like to text while I'm in a hand, and I like to talk on the phone, and I like to do a lot of things that also don't contribute to an orderly tournament. And you know, the being out of my seat, it's hard for me as a floor if I've got a lot of players in a small cramped room, if they're out of their seats, if they're sweating the action on their tables, and if they're standing up in between hands. So there's a lot of things that I like to do that aren't necessarily the best interest from an administrative point of view. And I mean, this rule for the floors and managers in here, I understand the players have a big part of this. I'm a player as well. But from the floors and managers, if you've done this rule, I don't think anyone in the room who tried the rule didn't like it. Maybe there are some. Maybe they would like to add their 2 cents in there.
I can give my experience, WPT, Christian. When we take this rule 2 years ago, and I can remember, Neil, if you adapted this rule for the EPT Barcelona, it was the first major event in Europe.
We've had it since 2011.
Okay, so you did already. And I have right after the WPT Cyprus, and in Cyprus there are a lot of Russian, a lot of Turkish. I am Italian, so the Latin are not easy to manage like the Scandinav guys, okay? So I just asked the Matt Savage, and I said, what I have to do with this? I said, be strong. And I was a little bit not scared because I have to assume and to take my responsibility. And I was not happy 100% for the first time to apply this in Europe. And I have to say that everybody complained at the beginning, and after everybody accept. And we have a rule. So it's for that reason that my point of view is that once that now they know this rule, I know that some player they don't like, but we have to treat the same everybody. I think that my personal opinion, we should keep going with this rule.
Matt, can you put up the next slide?
Guys, if I may chime in just one more time.
We're going to 56.
Right. Right. Right, no, of course.
We'll never get off this rule. Yeah.
Guys, with the first card rule, we're killing hands if people are there in plenty of time to play. I don't think it creates any sort of disorderly environment. Obviously, I think we all agree that you need to be at your seat eventually to play your hand, right? So in cash games, typically you wait until it's your turn, then you kill that person's hand. In tournaments, I think we agree that doesn't really work very well for various reasons. So we go to the last possible, determinant, which is the last card. And when we adopt first card, you said bring amateurs to the game. Amateurs don't like to get to the table when they can easily play their hand and then have the hand taken from them. And especially as far as dealer procedure goes, with last card, as I think one of the former dealers mentioned, it's much easier to just take those cards as soon as you're through dealing. When you're using first card, you either need to deal dead hands to a live stack, or to place the cards sort of like in the muck early already. And I think that we've seen that creates a fair amount of misdeals because dealers get confused as to where this card should go, that card should go, and it becomes annoying for the players. And the other option, like I said, is dealing these dead hands to live stacks where now a player comes back, he has his cards in front of him, he looks at it, it's a good hand, the dealer takes it from him, and now this guy's just pissed for the rest of the tournament. So I understand that you said people kind of stop complaining. Speaking for players, pretty much, I'd say when I talk to people, it's more like 80%. I understand I get biased responses, but in our very unbiased survey, it is more like 3-1. We just, we don't like it, and we don't see the need for it. And the fact that it's, kind of being imposed because TDs think it's a little bit better for us or better for them is frustrating as a player. So I would much appreciate, you guys considering our feelings. Thank you.
Dan, I don't have a dog in this fight, but I can say that over the last couple of years that we've used it, I could probably count on my hand, on my 5 fingers, the amount of times that we've killed hands. Most players just get used to being there, and it's not really a problem at that point. Like I said, I think this is more a convenience issue for the players. They want to be able to move about and get back to their seat. I don't have a problem with that, but I do know that the rule does work, and I think that either way it works. If the last card works fine for me, if it works for the players, or the first card works fine for me. So I don't really have a dog in the fight.
Just to add one thing about the slide that you're looking at, because truthfully, we could talk about this until 5 o'clock. At the end of the day, these are the 4 options that we're going to have. So you might start looking at these 4 options, and if you can't make a decision today, it's something we could revisit. You know, you kick it around this evening, and Johnny and I were talking, maybe this is one of those that you got to think about for a little while, maybe come back on Saturday and put it to a vote. But those are the 4 options. The rule does need to be amended in some fashion. It's just a question of how, and it's one of those options.
So just for a show of hands, how many are currently... I need to cut Steve off at some point. How many of you are using first card off the deck right now? And how many are using last card off the deck? Okay, so the question is are any of you, by show of hands, that are using first card off the deck, having problems with it? Yeah, none of us play poker. Only you play poker. We don't play poker.
Everybody up here on the dais plays poker. Everybody in this room plays poker.
Sorry, excuse me. Hey, you just asked how many people are having problems with it, and I understand that. In my opinion, the first card off the deck rule would make much less problems for tournament staff and people directing tournaments. So yeah, likely it's going to be less problems. However, the main problem that exists is how your players feel about it. And as industry people for poker, everyone here has a job and more people have jobs because poker players are drawn to playing poker. So I think that our first priority should be to appease our players and to do what it is that they want. So, I mean, honestly, I think if you ask most people, especially recreational players, that the majority of them honestly don't even care either way. But if you did have like a percentage for if players prefer last card or first, I would lay tremendous odds that the overwhelming majority would prefer the last card rule. So I mean, honestly, like. As a player, it's my responsibility to protect my hand.
Yes, guys, just to jump in here, because again, like I would reiterate, we've been running this rule for 5 years in Europe. I'm not getting any complaints. I've had 2 incidences in the last 2 years. They were with the same player, so I'm having no complaints from anybody that is actually. So when you say, I understand you say, well, the players would prefer, but I had 5,000 people in Barcelona, 14,000 entries. I don't know how many hands were killed, but I would doubt we're killing any more hands than we were with last card off the deck. That's anecdotal, but I'm not having players come going, I got screwed by this. I can't believe you guys are doing this horrible rule. This series is doing it the other way. None of our interactions in Europe are having that. So
I don't know I can't remember a time I've gotten my hand killed before this rule, and I've gotten it killed twice since. Like, I'm not going to get many hands killed. I'm a professional poker player. I'm going to get every hand that I can, but it does inconvenience me tremendously, and I'm sure that my peers feel the same exact way.
What we did...
I'm sorry. Yeah, like... Okay, I turn around and I'm talking at the table behind me and to, like, my friend saying something, and now all of a sudden, like, a card is pitched, my hand is dead. Otherwise, I have, like, 5 seconds when
It's
cards
not,
are
because you're at the table.
It's irrelevant. I mean, it doesn't matter. Like, it's the same thing. Like, I'm gonna have more time to know, like, okay, a hand is coming. Get
just
back to your
so everyone understands, because and I'll do this very, very quickly. The reasons that it was suggested in 2013. The first one, you're correct, is game integrity. You should never have to worry that people at your table are standing behind you while you're playing. That's a pretty simple one. The second one is dealer integrity, as was brought up. The dealer cutting the deck and pitching that first card is pretty standard for a dealer. They're just going to get that out, and they're not going to have to worry about, oh, here comes Phil Ivey, I got to slow down, or here comes that jerk that never tips me, I got to speed up. The third one is, and this one was a bit weird, is live cards with no player. Under last card on the deck, the cards that go to the big blind or the under the gun, they can sit there with no player there and they'll be live, even though there's nobody sitting there controlling those cards, all the way until it comes around to the button. And for Omaha or 5-card draw, it could be 4 or 5 cards sitting in a seat with no player. The fourth one was bubble play. It helps. That's more organizational, admittedly, more operational. That it controls the bubble, keeps players in seats. Room flow is another one. It keeps players in seats, which I know goes against the social element. And the final one was a kind of health and safety, was it prevents that home run slide of where that player comes running across just to get his last hand and goes sliding into home over through 3 drink trays and everything else. And the stuff that was said against it, but the stuff that was said against it was, the first one is, we don't need a change, we've always done it this way. The second one is the security issue isn't enough to warrant a change, it just doesn't happen enough. And the third one was the social element. And as I can't necessarily speak for everybody who has the small, like 5 and 10 table rooms, but this isn't an issue in our 100, 200, 300 tournaments and stuff like that. Those guys are there to play poker, they're in their seats. They're not wandering around to talk to the guys they've staked or the people that bought action from them or the general. It's a very cliquey community for those of you guys who play 4 and 5 figures with each other, and you talk to each other all the time in those tournaments. But it's not necessarily a rule that I believe is actually impacting the amateurs, at least not from our experience outside the United States. But that's literally, those are the points that went into the blog that came after this rule was adopted. Those were the 6 reasons for it and the 3 reasons given against it, just as a summary.
You've been waiting a long time. Go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. Again, I'm Mooski from the Hideaway up in Seattle. We used to have the last card off the deck, and then we switched it because TDA said you had to have the first card off the deck. The thing we found when the players, they said we don't like this for a bit, but the thing we found was we went to first card off the deck. You'd have the old guys, they'd be coming out of the bathroom. If they see the dealer still dealing, then you see old guys running for their seats. You don't want to see that. It's a horrible sight. But then when we switched it to first card, as soon as they see the dealer, they start dealing. Okay, my hand's going to be dead. I don't have to run to my seat. I don't have players running through the room, running pell-mell all over the place to get back there before that last card is there. And then they got a quick sit down. Oh, yeah, I'm here. But the first card, as soon as they see that dealer moving, they start walking instead of running.
That's a new perspective.
We don't want to see old people run.
Hey, watch it.
Matt and Dan, I would ask you, is this more about the killing of hands, or is it player convenience, player camaraderie, social aspect? Which one is it?
It's very much both. Obviously, if you just have us sit in our seats the entire time, it's not going to be an issue. But again, I don't think we've made any good points as to why we're just killing my hand. Where I know we keep saying, oh, game integrity got to stand behind you. It doesn't happen. And it's really hard for that guy to get to his seat in time with flash card anyway. Additionally, the person that's right next to you can still see your hand, whether he's standing there like legally by this method or not. And I think it's a little bit unfair to keep asking, do we have any problems with this rule? Because did we have any problems with the last one? With the last card? I mean, it seemed like that was going pretty well. And as a player, any time that someone asks, is it first card or last card, I will say, hey guys, what do you guys think about that? Which one do you prefer? It's just overwhelming. Oh, last card, thank God. So, yeah, I understand that maybe it's not like a huge issue. I know that people were dedicating a lot of time to something that isn't the biggest deal. But I just don't see why we're changing it from where it was. It's just very easy, convenient. Players like it. And it's just, well, this is a little bit better for us, so we're just going to do it. It's just very frustrating.
So, Jeff Johnson from Calgary, Alberta, Grey Eagle Casino. We ran a WPT Deep Stack series, and we invited a special guest tournament director. I can't remember his name. And what happened was we were doing last card off the deck for the whole series, so 8, 9 events, and then Matt came and said, well, we're going to first card off the deck. And we were scared, me and Kenny were really scared because we thought we were just going to get killed by the players. But we got no complaints. The players welcomed it. I don't have any complaints as a TD or a host that my hand was killed. I get more complaints when it was last card off the deck about that dealer waiting for Bob to come in versus, oh, my hand's dead. So you're protecting your game, and we're getting more hands per hour now in the tournament because the players aren't walking over here and going, oh, hold on, I'm coming, and then it's slowed down for that 2-3 seconds. So that's what you're protecting. You're protecting the integrity of the game, as well as you're getting more hands per hour for the players because the players are in their seat and they're not walking around. They're not saying, hey, how did you do last hand? They're in their seat, they're playing cards, they're playing poker. That's what the breaks are for, and that's when they're out of the hand. So it's been a huge success at our room, and we're going to stay with first card off the deck.
I just worry that if we go with house rule, that tournament players going from one tournament to the next won't know whether it's the first card off the deck or the last card off the deck, and back
That's
and
true,
forth.
but they don't know now. The first thing I do when I go to a place now is I say, do you use first card or last card? Because it is so divided, and so I would have to know.
I believe I have an original contribution.
Good, let's only take new things now.
Surprise.
Because our 40 minutes is almost up. They're actually calling time on us on the live feed.
It's been a reasonable amount of time.
Go ahead, something new.
Well, new on this topic. I mean, I just thought of it during this discussion. I believe one thing I think a player is entitled to know is what his or her position is at the table. Or in other words, how far from the button, or in other words, how many players are yet to act. Obliquely, Neil touched on this by mentioning that the blinds may have live cards in front of them with no person in the seat. So that is an issue in favor of, I'm not saying how important it is, you guys can decide, of first card off the deck. So that when I make a decision pre-flop in a flop game, I know how many people have yet to act behind me.
One suggestion, could we take a straw poll on page 51 here? Not an official vote, just kind of to get people to start thinking about the options, because ultimately we're going to have to pick one of these four things here. After we've discussed about the pros and the cons for maybe another half hour or an hour, or however much time you want to deal with the pros and the cons, we will be back to page 51 eventually.
I think that's fair, Mike. I think we table it at this point. Let's move forward and, hey, real quick. Oh, I thought we were going to do that tomorrow.
And guys, I'm sorry, just 20
an
seconds
informal.
and I'm done with everything. Just on some of maybe like the attitudes that I've heard, and I know this, you didn't maybe mean this by it, but it sounds very school-like. Like, you guys can talk to each other on break, you guys can do this when, this happens. And to be honest, or to be fair, you guys aren't teachers, we're not students. We appreciate your authority, but that is not the environment that I want to go play poker in. And if that is how I feel like I'm being treated, like, listen, sit over there, buddy, you can talk to your friend in 25 minutes. It's just not, I come there to be social, most people do, and to take that position, I think, is really going to start affecting players. So thank you, guys.
Hey, I know we're going to vote on this, and I think that's important. We did vote on this last time. I'll say that personally I was against this rule change. We did adapt it because it is a TDA rule, and that's what we agreed on. We voted on, and we went with it. I think it's important that either we vote on this, come to an agreement of first card or last card. I honestly don't think it matters. I don't think it was a rule that is even important enough that it probably should have never been changed, because I don't even think it's that important. However, I'm okay either way. But it's important to what we're trying to do with standardized rules and the integrity of the TDA as a whole, that the members of the board come to an agreement, and either everybody does it one way or it's out of the TDA rules completely.
They're not going to, that's one of the
Well,
problems.
I know, but it's important. If we all don't agree out here, that's one thing. But for the members of the board to not agree on such an important or a rule like this, then it shouldn't be in the TDA rules to begin with.
Yeah, okay, but it was Jesse, it was still 90% of the room was going one way. That's part of the issue.
Well, I can tell you that from everything I've heard, there's not.
Right, we agree with that.
If nothing else comes out of this, because apparently nobody really cares one way or the other. I think it's just a question of, for Dan and Matt, and probably for myself, is I'd like my voice to be heard. Now, on this issue, I really don't have a dog in the fight. What I would ask is that if you guys are going to go first card off or whatever, don't have the dealers do short deals, because what Danny said is 100% true. There are more missed deals on those than any other thing I've ever seen. So it appears that nobody's really got any strong feelings one way or the other about this, other than the poker players themselves. The tournament directors seem to be fairly divided, and
They're not, though. You just saw that by a show of hands. Even the ones that changed didn't really have issues with it. So it's not totally divided.
And I
that's
don't
for
think
sure.
that any rules should be made because it makes it easier for the tournament director. I think it really should be about what your players want, what's good for the community. So of those people, I think the question that was asked, are you having problems with the rule? That's not what we should be asking. The question is, those of you who have switched, raise your hand if you think your players really like the rule. Do you think your players like the first card? Those of you who are using it. Most of you are using it, so okay.
And by roughly a 3-1 margin, it looks like.
And maybe the question to ask is, what do you think your players would vote? And that's what would probably make sense to worry about.
There's a gentleman in the back right hand who's been waiting very patiently. Sir?
Hey guys, Matt Glantz here. I think that it would be foolish for me to argue the merits of the first card off the deck or the last card off the deck, because it's pretty clear that everyone has different points of view, and I think whether your room adopts first card or last card after a few years, the players are not going to complain either way. But I think it's important to note that you guys up there on stage adopted a rule 2 years ago. I think it was 2 years ago.
No, that's a mistake. We didn't adopt it.
Okay, well, everyone adopted the rule and agreed to that rule, but only, as what you said, Linda, that only 50% of the rooms that you have traveled to 70 rooms across the country are reusing it. I think that it shows something when you guys adopt a rule and only 50% of the rooms are using it. Have you ever adopted another rule where that was the case? I also believe that if you adopted the last card off the deck rule now, 90% of the rooms would probably use that rule. It would be more uniformity. So my thoughts are that the idea of that rule originally was partly politically motivated, and which is fine. That's just life. But the other reason was for the uniformity factor. And since you don't have that uniformity factor at this point, if you go back to last card off the deck, especially in this country, I think it'll be much more uniform and better for the players.
I think a lot of the card rooms who are using the first card off seem to be happy with it and likely would not change back.
Like I said, I think any room using either rule is happy with their rule, because the players don't seem to really care that much overall. So it's not an issue more of what's a better rule. I think it's more of an issue at this point of getting uniformity. I think it's very important with the TDA to have uniformity across the country and across the world. So I think what most rooms would prefer, just based on you guys making it a rule a couple years ago, that only half the rooms actually changed it, even though you said 90% of the people in the room agreed to it at that point. It seems like their players must have had a lot of backlash by changing the rule or adopting the new rule. So by going back to the original rule, I think you would have much more uniformity at this point.
Hi, may I? My name is Barbara Jones, and I wear many hats, as most of us do. I'm a player, I'm a dealer, and I'm a tournament supervisor. Nobody likes change. I was one of them. I didn't like this rule when it first came out. But as a dealer, I prefer the rule. I think it's much easier as a dealer. It's very simple. It's cut and dry. The player's either at their seat or they're not. When I'm dealing and I'm doing last card off the deck, it's more difficult if I'm pitching this way to see, oh, did that guy make it before I hit the button over here, to see if his hand is live or dead. So that's just my perspective.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you.
All right, quickly, I'll be 30 seconds. Danny Anton, Boulder Station. After hearing both arguments, I was really on for last card, but now I think I'm in the Matt Savage camp of not caring. But there's one thing that I do care about, and we should all care about, is uniformity. All right. Earlier in the conference, Jack was up there and said, you know what, I'm going to adopt what the TDA does and not make someone show a hand. And I want uniformity no matter where I play. I live here in Las Vegas and I play in Las Vegas. If I go to Planet Hollywood or Aria or Bellagio or the Rio, I don't want two different sets of rules. And right now we have two different sets. Now, he was nice enough to cave to the TDA and say, you know, I'm going to come to your side. And I think here's an instance. I think we've seen it very clearly. It is split down the middle, roughly-ish. Some people like it, some people don't. Whatever it is, we should try to go to there so both sets of major rules used in our game today are the same. We should aim for 100%. Hopefully one day the TDA rules and WSOP rules, the biggest brand in our game, are exactly the same. And this is something I think we should try to conform on and move on.
And I think that makes a really good point, and not that, you know, I've got an ally here, and I don't even know who the gentleman is, so I'm just going to say, one of the things that we need to look at when we're trying to create any rules for poker tournaments is, what are we creating the rules for? Are we creating the rules because we want to make it easier on ourselves? Are we trying to create rules where it becomes the most comfortable for the players and where we can, you know, handle the most organized events and obviously uphold the most integrity in the process? And so some people create rules to say, these are the rules that you need to live by. And I agree with that to a certain degree, but I also believe that players play the way that they play, that there's an environment and the way that they act, the way that they are, and that we should be creating rules around how they play, right? And not necessarily telling them how to play, because at the end of the day, it's the players versus the players and not us versus the players. And so we have to always keep that in mind no matter what the rule is. So, just for the record.
And ladies and gentlemen, just to look at again at slide 51 here, there are 4 options up there. If you go to the next 4 pages, you will see the actual language for each one of those options. So if you want to see, hey, what would option 1 look like, go to the next page. Option 2, 2 pages, etc. So you can be looking at the language and saying, okay, this is how it would impact my property. If we can't reach a decision today, this is one of those that it's probably a good one to go back to your room, go to the bar or whatever, and just kick it around. Think about it overnight, and come back in the morning. So we've got a full session tomorrow. You don't have to rush into something tonight, but you do have the actual language right here that you can look at.
My name's Ralph. I'm with the Isle Casino in Pompano. I don't see it on the options. Is keeping first card off the deck not one of the options now?
No.
It's not listed. So. Okay.
Guys, we have to look at the fact that apparently, I think there's a perception issue here. The players perceive that rule change as negative and didn't, whatever the motivations were, there's a negative perception by a very substantial portion of our player base to that rule. Now, whatever option we take or whatever decision we make, there's obviously a situation that needs to be addressed here. Otherwise, we wouldn't spend 40, 50, 60 minutes on this rule. So the fact that there's an obvious situation that has to be addressed, the four points that we have up there are the most likely outcomes. As Mike very eloquently put it earlier, we're going to come to the same conclusion regardless. We're going to all speak our piece, and then we're going to get to those 4 options, or the 5th option being not changing it, if that's one of the options. But regardless, what we're trying to get everyone to do is look at those options, find out if that's what you want to do, any of those 4 options, think about those, and we're probably going to, I'm guessing, get a deeper discussion tomorrow. Is that correct? Or a vote? Or
I think discussion at this point is down to we've discussed it and we just need to decide. And I think that might be that we need to give people some time to maybe think about it and then, call it in.
One quick thing here, whether it's the first card off the deck or it's the last card off the deck, the player has the choice whether they're going to play that hand. If they know the rule and what it is, then they can play that hand. If they want to get up and talk, if they want to go over and do what they want, then They
That's
know
the problem.
that the first card.
That's is the problem that I have with the rule, because we're telling the players how they should act and what they should do, instead of having a rule where it's, you know. But in the last card situation, it is a lot different, right? And I understand about running to the tables and that sort of thing. But anyway, we're not going to come to a consensus.
So
I know
you're
that
gonna
we're not going
You're going
to
to go back to maybe all the cards are out, and if it's their turn to act and they're not there, then you're going to just kill their hand at that point.
Could be. I think the big difference this year is compared to 2 years ago, is this year there's player representation here and there's a survey here. So those are the two things that you really have to look at as far as the differences between 2 years ago making that decision and making that decision this year.
Real quick, we do last card because it creates more action. More people get to look at their cards. That's what our players like. They want last card. I'm not 100% opposed to going to first card. I don't think that's what the players like. But if you guys can't come up with the decision, I sustain from the vote. Why even vote if you guys can't decide this is what we should do? Because we can all vote yes, or we can all vote no. And if people were holding out, then it's house way, you know. So.
I think that's what I said 40 minutes ago.
There you have it. There you have it.
I mean, guys, just real quick, if I could just make my final statement or what, I don't know. We don't need to do a survey. I beg you to do a survey and go with what the survey says, because I'm confident that it's going to go with last card, but we don't need to do that. Like, the pros of each is first card, okay, you're going to be able to run your room way easier. It's definitely making everyone here that runs a poker tournament, it's going to make their job easier, especially on the bubble. If you have first card, there's going to be less people out of their seat, and that's definitely a benefit to it. Last card, the benefits is your players get to be more social. They get to come to their event. They get to talk to their friends while they're playing, and they are less likely to lose a hand. But I just want to reiterate that our goal as industry men and women in poker is to get the most customers possible. And we're not conducting a class. What we're doing is we're trying to get as many people as possible. In order to do that, we need to entertain them, and they need to enjoy themselves. There's nobody that is strongly adamant from the players in the first card rule. However, there are tons that are very adamant about last card. And then most people just don't even care. And to be honest, I'm not saying that if we vote first card that I'm not going to play. I'm still playing tournaments. But the fact of the matter is that our goal is to grow poker and to get as many people as possible. And in order to do that, we need to appease our players. And the best way to do that is the last card off the deck rule. So, I mean, go with the survey. I'm confident last card will be through. But I don't mind it being like a house interpretation and doing what your house wants, because then more people are going to play at the casinos that have last card. And your house is the one that's going to suffer. So, I mean, it's simple as that. From a person running a tournament's perspective, first card is way better and easier, and it definitely stops a lot of potential problems. But it's just simple. Players appreciate the last card off the deck rule, and I think that's our number one priority.
All right, so hi, I'm Kelly. I'm from Borgata. I've kind of been squirming in my seat in regards to this all day, just because I wasn't sure whether or not I was going to say anything on this topic, just because I was only in support of Matt Savage, and when he said he really didn't care, I guess I didn't really care either way either. Whether we go first card off of the deck or last card off of the deck has both worked substantially for us at Borgata. However, I can guarantee you that since we implemented first card off of the deck, I have had a significantly less amount of floor calls, discrepancies, and ambiguity that go along with whether or not that player was there when the last card was off of the deck. In addition to that, players also feel like you are stealing their hand from them if they've arrived at the table and now the dealer turns around and says, "Oh no, sir, I'm sorry. The last card was to the button. That hand is dead." If it's first card card off of the deck and you train your dealers, you make it part of dealer procedure to deal short if that player is not there. When that player arrives at the table, he doesn't even have a hand to miss. So I understand that players feel like last card off the deck is taking away something from them, but if they get up in the middle of the hand on a flop, they have a specific amount of time. If they need a signal in order to get back, that's fine as well. However, that signal is that riffle or that shuffle machine opening. You have to be in constant observation of your game. You're adults. If you don't want to play that hand, you can walk away from the game. You can enjoy your game. I understand why Jack does not want to implement the WSOP, because WSOP is a huge social event. It really is. But we also have our EPT that loves this rule. They've been doing it a long time. So I think TDA as a whole has the ability to set in stone a rule that says, hey, we only recognize specifically 2 things. So why can't we look at that option of, hey, we can give them that choice? You as a TD have that choice. We have a lot of house procedures that go along that complement the rules. So there's no reason why it's been one way or the other, set in stone, do it this way. Why can't we say we only recognize 2 specific things? It is either first card off of the deck or last card off of the deck, and that can be our rule.
One last one, Leothias.
Last one. We're counting down from 10, then this hand is dead.
By the way, I'm going to first card hits the button, and then your hand's dead. That's what I'm doing.
Hi, Leothias, Grego Casino in Calgary. A couple of things, and I have to address different people. The gentleman that stood up, he may have chosen the wrong word. He's kind of young. He may not be a history person. You never appease anybody. You look at Mr. Chamberlain when he tried to appease Mr. Hitler. We all know what the result of appeasement was back then. So I'm saying perhaps the gentleman got the wrong word. I'll give him credit. 100%, we all want to get more players playing poker. Players will come and play, especially rookies, when they think they have a chance to win. That's why rules are in place. They're not in place like in school that you must and you mustn't. Rules are in place so that everybody has an equal opportunity to win. The best player with the most skill should win most of the time. However, you have to protect the player who's just starting out. You can't have him being taken advantage of. And that's why rules come into play. I've only been doing this for about 32 years, so I'm really new at the business. Rules have changed and evolved, etc., but for a reason. You had the basic set. This is what you need. This is the order of hands. This is how you win. This is how you bet. This is how you raise. Great. And over time, people start figuring out angles. TDs figure out, okay, this is how we prevent the angle. So we add a rule. And another one. It's not got nothing to do with school. It's to keep everything level and equal. First card off works. And it does it. And if it prevents one guy from peeking at somebody's hand, the rule has done its thing. We've introduced first off the top. It's been brilliant. Like the lady from Borgata said, we've had no issues. It's just the players know. Get there. We should have absolute. Everybody should be on the same page with this. Hopefully it'll happen. But I just had to make a couple of things. Like she said, I was squirming in my seat because there's a reason for rules. Social life, etc., in a $30 tournament, when there are thousands of dollars in the buy-in, you want to make sure that you're there and you're looking at your hands and you don't have to worry that while I'm thinking about my hand, some dude is behind me looking at my cards. And that's the difference. Thanks very much.
Can I add one thing to this? This has been an excellent discussion. It really has. We've taken up an hour, but everybody's had their say, I think, and we've heard from the players, the first card houses, the last card houses. It's been about as good and cordial an exploration of this topic as you could have.
And I appreciate the way everybody's been respectful of each other in the presentation of their opinion. Okay, I think we should vote tomorrow. He'll not change. He's not changing. You're not changing, you're not
It's
changing.
adamant. You
Okay.
guys are drawing dead.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, next topic.
Okay, guys. Number 30, and then I'm going to let Johnny take some of these. All right. Oh, that's why I'm taking this one. All right. At the table with action pending, players with live hands must remain at the table if betting action remains on the hand. Leaving the table is incompatible with protecting your hand and following the action and is subject to penalty. Here's the discussion. Can we further define at the table? Is it at your seat, in the vicinity of your seat, arm's reach of table? Should this rule be at your seat with action pending? Okay, so does anybody have any comments about this one? Anybody feel passionate about this one? So for me, at your seat is within reach of your chair. You can touch your chair. Now, obviously, we do have certain circumstances, the World Series of Poker, that would not keep somebody right at their seat. Like, for example, two players are all in at the WSOP main event, and all the cameras are on him, and he wants to go over to the audience. All the hands are face up, all the action's in, and now all we're doing is waiting for the dealer to deal, and all the intensity's happening in the moment, and the lights are down, everybody's paused, and the guy goes over and he puts his head down, or he goes over and he hugs his wife or something. You know, for me, it's okay because it's good for TV. When all the other pomp and circumstance isn't going on and you don't have all the eyes watching the situation and it's just a normal table, I think being at your seat is absolutely mandatory. And the only exception I would say would be in one of those circumstances. Anybody have any issues with this rule, and how should we define it? Anything? Matt? We're good? Everybody's good with this? Okay. Mike, anything on the further define? We're good. We're going to leave as is.
Or is everyone basically happy with the language as is, just at the table? Is that workable for you?
At the table
without further defining it?
Okay. All right. Okie doke. Johnny, take away 31.
All right, 31, tournament play will use a dead button. That's pretty self-explanatory, and a lot of these are very short in verbiage, and will be moved through pretty quickly. So, tournament play will use a dead button. I think that's probably established. 32, dodging blinds. Players who intentionally dodge any blind when moving from a broken table will incur a penalty. Any substantial issues or changes necessary for that one out there? All right. Button and heads up. When heads up, the small blind has the button. It's dealt the last card and acts first pre-flop and last on all other betting rounds. When starting heads up play, the button may need to be adjusted to ensure no player has the big blind twice in a row. Any issues, problems, necessary changes, discussion, and that would be a no. All right, missed deals. Missed deals include but are not necessarily limited to 2 or more box cards on the initial deal, first card dealt to the wrong seat, cards dealt to a seat not entitled to a hand, a seat entitled to a hand that is dealt out, and stud if any of the player's 2 down cards are exposed by dealer error, and flop games if either of the first 2 cards dealt off the deck or any other 2 down cards are exposed by dealer error. Player may be dealt 2 consecutive cards on the button. House standards apply for draw games. An example is a low ball. Any necessary discussion, changes, or issues with that rule? Yes, sir.
The 2 consecutive cards on the button, in a live game you can't do that, but in a tournament you can. And then sometimes I've got dealers thinking that they're dealing in a live game and it's a tournament. They end up doing the 2 cards to the button and they go, oh, that's a misdeal. And then I've got to train the dealers, or have players that don't realize that there's a difference. What do I want me to stand? Okay, fine. Ooh.
7 p.m. Oh,
Yeah,
7 p.m.
Hi, how you doing? But anyways, the 2 cards, since it's different between live game and tournament.
Why do you say in cash games that you can't
Yeah.
do that? You did in
Yeah.
cash games?
Desperate times,
You
desperate
better
measures.
train your
Sometimes
dealers.
I need to have a live dealer deal in a tournament.
No, but you're saying that the rule is in cash games you can deal 2 cards in a row to the button?
No.
Yeah?
Yes, you can.
You're,
Yeah,
in the,
you can.
you're in the severe minority right now. sir.
Random cards.
Really, really?
Maybe,
Yes.
and
Yes, you
listen,
can.
I'm from Seattle, so I know that we do things a little differently there. But
Yeah.
no,
You
we don't
can-
do
you
that
can do
differently
it.
there. Seattle,
Really?
you can deal 2 cards in a row in a cash game to
Well,
the
then
button.
ignore me.
For about
So,
10 years
Just,
now.
just like my
Good.
dealers do.
That's
Just
why you
ignore
didn't want
me.
us to know who was speaking.
There we go.
Okay,
The
7 o'clock. We'll
aristocrats.
see you at cocktails.
All right, I also have to cover sections B and C in this. B, in a misdeal, the redeal is an exact replay. The button does not move. No new players are seated, and limits stay the same. Cards are dealt to players on penalty or who were not at their seats for the original deal. Then their hands are killed. The original deal and redeal count as 1 hand for a player on penalty, not 2. And then C, if substantial action occurs, a misdeal cannot be declared, and the hand must proceed. Any problems with A, B, or C on Rule 34? Okay. Rule 35, substantial action is either A, any 2 actions in turn, at least one of which puts chips in the pot, i.e. any 2 actions except 2 checks or 2 folds, or B, any combination of 3 actions in turn, check, bet, call, raise, or fold. See also Rules 34 and 38. Do we have any necessary discussion on substantial action? That would be a no.
Well, I think so, because when we talked about it at the last TDA, like we had, this has been on the forums, and for the forum members here, we've got like a several page discussion on this right now, so I wanted to bring it up real quick because many of us in the forums remember discussing that 2 actions had to involve putting chips in the pot, being discussed and voted on, but then the language didn't read that way when the rules were printed. That 1 person putting chips, so bet fold wasn't significant enough, but bet call, raise call, something to that effect was. Where at least 2 actions had to involve chips, or 3 total actions, being the way that it was discussed. Maybe I'm remembering wrong. Maybe all of us on the forums were remembering it wrong, but that was, I know it used to be worded that way at least, where 2 of the actions had to involve chips.
I know at one point it was definitely worded that way with 2 actions, any 2 actions involving chips or any 3 actions, period.
Yes.
I'm not sure for the impetus on changes.
So this one says that if one of them involves chips, then so if it's bet fold, that's significant action, according to this. And that was not what I remember being discussed at the 2013 summit, but then the wording was altered, I think, during the 1.1 or the 1.0 to 1.1, and then the wording was changed.
That would probably be something better addressed by one of the other board members or by someone else, because I was not at the
Does anyone else have a
2013
recollection of this? Where it was? Yeah, let me hand it to Mike here.
Yeah, what happened, this was in 2011? Right, and there was a lot of, the TDA did not have a substantial action rule prior to 2011. The WSOP did. So the TDA, the delegates wanted to adopt, who all was here in 2011? You probably remember this discussion. There was a lot of discussion, what should it be, 2 actions or 3 actions? That was what was being kicked around. And nobody could really agree on it. They thought 3 actions was too much, 2 actions was too quick. And so spontaneously, somebody from the floor suggested, well, you know, it could be 2 players with chips or 3 checks or 3 folds. And Dave Lamb said, you know, that's the World Series rule. And he said, do we want to adopt the World Series rule? And there was just kind of a spontaneous yes, response to, yeah, that's probably what we want to do. And if you go back and look at the WSOP language prior to the 2011 summit, this is exactly what it was. I think this language was a little cleaner. The WSOP rule back there was really, I mean, you could look at that thing and you'd try to put brackets around what it said. I mean, it was a very awkwardly worded rule. But this is the guts of it. So anyway, we got it wrong initially. We thought, okay, that means 2 actions with chips means both actions are with chips. But that isn't the way the World Series rule at that time was written. It was, and it specifically said bet and fold was in other words, it's 2 actions, one of which puts chips in the pot. So if you narrowly listen to the audio tape, you'll hear some of the board members saying, yeah, it's going to be 2 actions, both with chips. But if you do a transcript of everything that was said, what was voted in was we will adopt the World Series rule. So the TDA adopted the wrong language, and about 2 or 3 months later, it was corrected back to the correct language, which is this. So that's the history of it. So, and the debate we've seen recently on the forum has been people going back and kind of playing gotcha, frankly, and saying, well, this board member said both actions with chips, but that wasn't what the entire delegation voted in. That's about as short as I can make it.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. That being the case, I would basically say, are there any necessary changes to this rule? I mean, do we need to change it? Do we need to leave it as is? Discuss it? I'm getting no response, so I'm guessing that means leave it as is. All right, 36, the 4-card flop procedure. If the flop has 4 rather than 3 cards, whether exposed or not, the dealer shall scramble the 4 cards face down. A floor person will be called to randomly select 1 card to be the next burn card, and the remaining 3 cards will become the flop. Any necessary changes? Discussion? Yes, sir. Can somebody get that man a mic?
Hi, Justin Karitis from Stone's Gambling Hall, Citrus Heights. I would just like to see this say that the floor person's called up front rather than the dealer scrambling the cards and then the floor person coming over.
I think that's good, yeah. He's suggesting that the floor person, whenever this happens, you call the floor before you do anything, which is the right way to do it. Because we have it worded that, that the dealer does this and then calls the floor to pick. So Mike will come up with a brilliant way to make that happen.
Yeah.
Does everyone agree that the floor should be called right away?
It's like a premature burn-in turn.
Okay. Somebody's got a hand up.
Got a hand
Yes.
Thank you, Tabitha.
I think that part of the reason why you want the dealer to scramble them first is so that the floor manager can't see the cards before he picks them. That was probably a reason for having that rule.
They're scrambling face down.
Right, but if they do that while the floor manager is there, he can see where the cards end up. So this makes it blind for everybody.
Yeah, he can play 3-card Monty with us then.
I'm just imagining that's probably why the rule was stated that way, so that the floor manager doesn't see all 4 cards face up,
It would
then
be
mix
nice
them, and then
if
pick
there
it.
could be a combination somehow that you call the floor as you begin to scramble. I mean, there are certain things that you always call the floor for, like a premature burn-in turn. We all know what's going to happen, but you still have to call the floor. Something like this, we all know what's going to happen. If the cards are already face down when the floor person gets there and then witnesses the scramble, it's the same result without any
Right,
possible
exactly.
collision.
Yeah, I think that's probably...
And the other recommended, or at least spoken about procedure when it comes to that is when the floor walks up and they see the card scrambled, all they have to do is look in the other direction or face the other way while they're being scrambled. That eliminates the ability to identify cards. So you could do that.
Must do a 360.
There you have it.
Well, they got to come back. 2 180s.
Okay, so Michael, figure a way to make that happen.
We could put in this one, Kyle Morris again. We could put in this one that the dealer will turn the cards face down on the table, then call the floor, so the floor never has a chance to see them if they were exposed. Small.
All right, we'll take that in. Okay. Kelly says, turn the cards face up and let the dealer and let the floor man pick.
Guys, I think
I'm teasing Kelly.
in any situation we have where the dealer is going to call a floor person over, I think once the error has been recognized, I don't think the dealer should really do anything at all until the floor person gets there. Because there may be a 1 in a gazillion chance that the dealer does something incorrect there, even though it's a fairly simple procedure. And once they do something incorrect, now we're in a situation where we're flying by the seat of our pants. So it might be a more or better idea to just have the dealer call the floor and then handle the procedure afterwards. Once they get there, flip the cards over face down. The floor can turn around, do a cartwheel, whatever. Just don't watch the scramble. Turn around, pick 3, and we're done.
There seems to be a underlying theme of lack of trust in the dealers, because earlier it was said that the time that it's taking people to tank and do all this, are taking hands away from the players, but why aren't they calling the floor, scrambling it, when the floor gets there, they turn over a card, and boom, you're done. And you've just saved a minute or two. It seems like the dealers don't have much faith from the floor. I mean, you're wasting a lot of time waiting for them.
Hi. Okay, so I'm Kelly from Atlantic City again, in case you guys don't know me. We run, I'm sure a lot of houses here run smaller tournaments. Some of us run very large tournaments. And when we do so, we bring in dealers that we don't have a lot of experience with. I'm not saying they're break-ins, I'm saying we don't know them. That means they don't know us. So they function on other house rules, perhaps they're traveling dealers and they've adopted TDA rules in general, but for the most part, we try to make every decision when it comes to rulings so that we are sure those rulings are made to Brigada standards and to TDA standards. So it's not that we don't believe that the dealers have the ability to accomplish the task that we're given, it's that we don't have the time to train 200 dealers 6 times a year coming in the door in order to make sure that they have the ability to do everything in our tournament events that they might have the ability to do in your room every day. So I think the idea of giving as much willingness and ability to the floor people that we can train and least amount to the dealers isn't an insult to the dealers, it's actually a compliment to the floor staff that we have that run the tournaments. Right?
Right.
Good.
I mean, most.
You guys don't have to clap every time.
90+% of our dealers, I would trust and let them make a call. But you don't want your life, and I don't want my life in the hands of that other 10% who may be just from a break-in. So that's why we have these rules. It's not because we don't know that we have great dealers. We do. Most of them are wonderful.
But Linda, if we have a dealer that we don't trust to shuffle 4 cards face down while they're waiting for the floor to go over, I don't want that any.
Yeah. Right. That's fair.
There's one thing though that sat there, the dealer turned the cards over, and you saw the ace there, and now you accuse the dealer of turning around and, oh, you picked out the ace as the burn card.
I mean, it wasn't even there, Tom.
No, but I mean, for the dealers doing it, and they watch it, I saw that happen already.
All right, guys, as far as the procedure goes, I think we've agreed that the procedure is good. It just needs to be reworded a little bit, the order of scrambling the cards, et cetera. So Mike's going to get the language cleaned up, and I think we'll take another look. Number 37, methods of betting, verbal and chips. Part 1, A, players may bet by verbal declaration or by pushing out chips. If they do both, whichever is first defines the bet. If simultaneous, a clear and reasonable verbal declaration takes precedence. Otherwise, the chips play. B, verbal declarations may be general, call, raise, a specific amount only, 1,000, or both, raise 1,000. C, for all betting rules, declaring a specific amount is the same as pushing out an equal amount. For example, declaring 15,000 is the same as silently pushing out 15,000 in chips. This is a very extensive rule. We're going to go through all 3 parts of it and then go back and revisit them. 37, Part 2, acting in turn. Players must act in turn, and action in turn is binding as provided herein. B, chips committed to the pot in turn by declaration or by pushing out chips must stay in the pot. C, players must wait for clear bet amounts before acting. Example, no limit or pot limit. A says raise, but no amount, and B and C quickly fold. B and C should wait to act until A's exact raise amount is clear. And then Rule 37, Part 3.
I think we need to change C. Oh, we did already. Okay, you made that change. Thank you, Mike. Okay.
And then Rule 37, Part 3, binding declarations, undercalls in turn. And we had some very significant discussion on this. General verbal declarations in turn, such as call or raise, commit the player to the full current action. And then B, a player undercalls by declaring or pushing out less than the call amount without first declaring call. An undercall is a mandatory full call if made in turn facing 1, any bet heads up, or 2, the opening bet on any round multi-way. In other situations, the TD's discretion applies. For this rule, the posted big blind is the opening first round bet in blind games. All-in buttons can greatly reduce undercall frequency. See recommended procedure 1. So that is Rule 37, Parts 1, 2, and 3.
How many of you are using all-in buttons in your tournaments? Okay, every hand should be up, I would hope. It's those of you who are not, it's going to save you so much, so many floor calls, and it just makes it really easy. Highly recommended that you use all-in buttons. Glad to see so many do.
All right, so there's obviously a lot of verbiage here and a lot of very specific things that were discussed, so I'm sure there's got to be some necessary discussion on this, or would think there would. Is there any out there? Yes, there we go.
As far as players putting out undercalls, I've been in a lot of situations where dealers at the table would not announce a raise. For example, like someone in seat 1 or seat 10 would open the action, and then seat 1 wouldn't see it, and they'd throw in a call, and the dealer would announce nothing. And then they'd still be forced to either fold or complete the full bet. And I think that that's an issue that is technically the fault of the dealer, and that in this particular instance, a player should be excluded from having to keep the amount that they already put out there. What I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that. I don't know if there's already a rule stating that they're not obligated to keep that amount out there or not, but it's just something I've seen happen repeatedly.
I think that Rule 1 can apply here in what you're talking about. Like, if it's extremely, extremely noisy and somebody, says raise and the dealer doesn't repeat it and they're in seat 10 and 1, call the floor, and the floor can make that determination, because I have seen them make it where, this wasn't this guy's fault that he didn't know it was a raise, but it's got to be really extreme situations. But Rule 1 does handle that, in my opinion.
Just in my experience, a lot of TDs have been hesitant to be able to do that just because there's nothing written about approving it.
Yeah.
So.
And that's why, Rule 1, we were really trying to stress the fairness rule. That's, you guys listen to rule number 1 and base decisions on what is fair, not always what the rule says. If there are mitigating circumstances that make it worthy of overruling what the normal rule would be, then you have the right to do that. That's why we put Rule 1 in.
So further discussion about parts 1, 2, 3, A, B, C? No discussion necessary? Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, Kevin again here from the Garden. So you're changing the entire 37. I mean, you've got the old Rule 37 here, A, B, and C, A, B, and you basically just put it into parts 1, 2, and 3 here. I'm curious, why are we changing? We just took out the entire rule here.
Kevin, the idea is that 37, as it's currently written, is probably the most unwieldy TDA rule, because what's happened over the past few summits, there's been a new rule come up, it ends up in 37. Another rule comes up, ends up in 37. And so to kind of break so eventually, as it will be rewritten, if this rewriting is approved, it will essentially be 3 different rules in sequence to kind of separate out the separate ideas. But the language is largely the same, but not entirely the same. There is some additional language and so forth, but that's the idea of it. 37 is just very unwieldy as it is now.
Yeah, the first line in the old rule is players must act in turn, which I think everybody agrees with. Players must act in turn. I don't see that.
Yeah, that's
37A.
37A.
There's my second turn.
Part what? Part 2. There you go. Okay. Just have to be reviewed. Okay.
Are we good with it?
Is everybody good with the language the proposed language as written on the board there, the red?
Yeah, absolutely. If you read through this might be another one to just hold till tomorrow. Look it over, because there is some.
We're going to have several sidebar discussions that break out over the course of the next probably 12 to 18 hours or whatever before we come back tomorrow morning. And in those discussions, this first card, last card, all the other fun stuff's going to come up. So be thinking about those. And as we have that discussion tomorrow, then maybe we can reach some type of agreement that this is what we're going to do.
Question, Bob Fisher, microphone runner and part-time player. On 37, Part 1B, under raise 1,000, does it read raise to 1,000 or raise by 1,000? I've seen some dealers interpret it one way and some interpret it the other.
Do you remember that discussion? We had that discussion 3 or 4 days ago, right, Mike? Was it raised by 1,000 or to 1,000?
Raise 5,000. That's coming up. Yeah, there will be a rule addressing that. Thanks, Bob.
Right. I know we had discussed that at length the other day.
And maybe maybe when we get to it, it needs to be moved here.
Yeah, you'll see the raise of X versus raise 2X on page 110. It's a new topic for discussion.
And that's kind of leads to the unwieldiness of rule number 37, because we start getting a lot of stuff that actually relates to that could be broken down into more specific rules, and it's being lumped together. So, any other necessary discussion on that, or can we think about it overnight and then talk about it tomorrow?
Mike, when we get to that rule, it concerns this rule, so you'll probably move it into, so that they're together. Okay, great, thanks. You are the best. Where did we ever get Mike Bishop?
Mike is the nuts.
So,
Mike is the nuts.
I wish you guys knew.
All right, guys, let's look at 38, action out of turn. Action out of turn is subject to penalty and is binding if the action to the out-of-turn player has not changed. A check, call, or fold does not change the action. If action changes, the out-of-turn bet is not binding and is returned to the out-of-turn player, who has all his options, including calling, raising, or folding. An out-of-turn fold is binding. And then 38B, a player skipped by out-of-turn action must defend his right to act if there is reasonable time and the skipped player has not spoken up by the time the substantial action out-of-turn occurs to his left, then the out-of-turn action is binding. The floor will be called to render a decision on how to treat the skipped hand. Yes.
Hi, I'm Tim from Las Vegas. Action out of turn, part A. There's a couple of things that are missing. If a player checks out of turn, the World Series of Poker rules state that they cannot bet or raise when it comes their turn if they check out of turn. A lot of rooms use Robert's Rules of Poker, and in there he says the same thing. If you check out a turn, when it is your turn, you can only call or fold. You cannot bet or raise. So if the action remains a check, you have to check. If someone bets, you don't get all your options back.
So in other words, if you take a passive action, a check or a call, if the out-of-turn action is passive instead of aggressive, then when the action gets back to you and the out-of-turn action is corrected, you only have the option to act either passively.
Exactly. Here's the deal. First of all, the World Series of Poker site says you can only, hang on one second. A player, I'm nervous. I waited all day for this.
Make sure it's actually the WSOP site, because I get that all the time. Like, it's set on the website. Which one? Oh, the Oh, no, not that one.
Okay, where it's under the same rules, bets and raises. A player who intentionally acts out of turn will be penalized. When a player decides to check when it's not their turn in the action, they are held to the check and will not be allowed to call or raise. I think they can't bet or raise. They have to be able to call. Okay, that's the site, WSOP.com.
Yep, it's probably a typo. I'll take a look at it.
So all I'm saying is we need to address checking out of turn, and if you raise out of turn, you should still be held to raise out of turn no matter what, because if
the action changes, then
it should be addressed. It should be addressed because we only have a bet and a fold addressed in this rule.
I think there was a line that got deleted out of there. Must have been. I'll take a look at it.
Now, when you say in this rule, are you talking about?
No, he's talking about it in WSOP. Unless you've got it in here.
It says the out of turn action bet is not binding and is returned to the out of turn player who has all options, including calling, raising, or folding. But if they check out of turn, we should put it in writing that they cannot raise. They cannot bet if it is checked to them, but they cannot raise because the action changed. What you're doing is giving them an advantage by acting out of turn.
I think we discussed some substantial situations where it actually is a too severe penalty to hold a guy to raising in that spot too. I think one would be, number one, are we going to force him to min raise, or are we going to force him to move all in, or are we going to commit all of a guy's chips to the pot because he acted out of turn? I don't necessarily think that's the best thing.
What if he acted out of turn by checking with two players? He checked out of turn and then a guy bet, and all he'd be able to do is just call? there's been an aggressive action after that.
So it's real simple. So if a person checks or bets or calls out of turn, all right, and the action has not changed, then that action is binding, okay? If that player has now made his motion, but he acted out of turn, and now this player who has not yet acted goes back and changes that action by raising, then that call or that bet or that whatever it was that he put in there is no longer going to be binding, and we allow that person to change their action, but will enforce a penalty. And the penalty could be simply the first time a warning. If we feel that it's somebody that's taking advantage of those out of turn situations, could be more severe, but that is how we rule it, even if for whatever reason there's a typo, but that's it.
It's just the change of action. Change of action usually reopens things. It's just the way it is.
Do you have a suggestion for punishment? Would it be flogging? I'm kidding.
What he's suggesting is that some players are going to use this as an angle. You know, they're going to check when they know it's not their turn, because now somebody is going to think they're weak and they may bet, and now that's what he's suggesting. And I've seen it happen. And I think that what Jack just said about you can give a warning up to a penalty to somebody who does that, because some people, this is their MO. I've seen them do it, many times. So I think we do need to stop angle shooting, but I think maybe just a warning when you know that somebody's doing this.
Jacob Vale, Canterbury Card Casino in Shakopee, Minnesota. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but that person's running a great risk of having someone check behind them, have their action binding anyways. I mean, it may be a calculated risk, but in that sense, we can punish them if we know that they are trying to take an angle or they are doing this on, extreme frequency.
Unlike that gentleman, I think action out of turn, if you're checking action out of turn, you could be check raising and waiting for somebody behind you. It could just be an accident. My issue with the checking out of turn is when you're last to act. That's when I think the passive action should result in a passive response once the action gets fixed. There would be no situation where you would be last to act and check, yet decide to raise when someone bet. So
That's what he's talking about.
No, he's talking about no matter where you're at. I specifically think the rule should be addressed for when a player's last to act, they check out of turn. In turn action is a bet or a raise, whatever it is. Now that person who last to act checked wants to take an aggressive action. If you're a player checking last to act, there's no aggressive action on your mind at that point. There's nobody after you.
Yeah, sorry. My only issue with that is I think that there's situations where I might flop a really strong hand as a player, and I would ideally just be checking to give everyone a free card. However, if someone were to bet into me, then I might potentially raise. So I think it is possible that you would want to change your action from checking to being aggressive, even if you are last to act. One question I also wanted to bring up was, if I'm the last to act and I say bet, and then I don't specify the amount, and I am acting out of turn, and then it does check to me, do I get to change the amount? Do I get to decide how much I do want to bet if I never really specified, or am I held to a minimum wager?
As long as the calling amount doesn't change to you, you really haven't completed what I would consider action until you've specified your betting amount.
So I just have to bet.
Absolutely.
That's almost the way that I could angle in that aspect, where if a guy's getting ready to bet 3,000 chips and the blind's 400, and I'm just bet. And I have a draw and I want to get there cheap. Now he's going to be oh, well, this guy's going to bet. And then I could just only bet 400 or something. And then the guy might be afraid to raise me now because he's oh, well, he bet still. And I might get there cheaper. Or he might just raise to I don't know. I feel you could still angle in that regard also. So just something to think about.
The question that I have, Matt, and thank you to all the players who showed up and are participating, because that is definitely what we want. And on questions like this, that's why I'm glad you raised your hand and spoke on it. I think a significant chunk of out-of-turn action is accidental. We all understand that. A massive proportion of out-of-turn action is accidental. And for the players that are, a lot of the actions that you just described, and the ones where you can kind of vibe it's an angle and stuff like that, I think you pretty much just have to decide as the TD to penalize. I'm not sure. We tried this with a rule, I think it was like 3 years ago, and it was very ill-received by the players. I can't remember the specifics of it, but I remember it being very ill-received. And I don't know that you can do a one-size-fits-all penalty in this situation, because you might end up penalizing 90% of the people who it was just a genuine accident. In general, for action out of turn. To the specific scenario, that could be something, but I'm still comfortable with Rule 1 allowing me to come in and say, this is the second time you've done that. Because Matt put a perfect scenario in where he may change his action based on the action that changed in front of him. Yes, he's made a mistake, he's acted out of turn, but it doesn't preclude the fact that, well, these actions do change his action. So I personally would not be in favor of changing it to where any type of auto penalty for or auto restricted to their actions if the action changes in front of them.
Right. If it becomes a pattern that you're doing this as an angle, that's a different story than what you described, and what you described can happen, without it being an angle.
Yeah, I think that this language is the same as written in the previous version of the rules, and I don't know that there's any major necessity to change the rule, short of the instance we were talking about there, and we can still use Rule 1 to change or to penalize those spots. So, absent anything else, we're probably going to just move on to the next rule. Any other discussion? All right, we're going to go to methods of calling. Methods of calling. Standard and acceptable forms of calling include A, saying call, B, pushing out chips equal to a call, C, silently pushing out an over chip, or D, silently pushing out multiple chips equal to a call under the multi-chip rule. Silently betting a chip relatively tiny to the bet is a non-standard, strongly discouraged, subject to penalty, and will be interpreted at TD's discretion, including being ruled a full call. Example, blinds are 2 and 4,000. Player A bets 50K. B silently puts in one 1K chip.
Anybody have that happen? Okay. And?
So it happened yesterday at the WSOP?
Yeah, daily. In the daily tournament, 235 daily, happened 5 or 6 times. Big bet, guy throws in one chip, no floor is called. The dealer instantly states that's a call. That's exactly what happened all day yesterday, and it happened many times. In the daily tournament, though, this wasn't one of the premier events. It's just the 235 daily. Down here at standard is what they all told me, because I asked, "Don't you call the floor in that position?" They said, "No, that's a call."
Well, what
one
else
chip on a large bet.
Yeah, facing a large bet.
There wouldn't be much other reason for him to drop one chip in there, right?
No, they instantly called it. All the dealers did the same thing, and it happened at least half a dozen times.
Well, they should. Right?
And I even asked the dealers, I said, "Don't you call the floor there?" And they said, "No, that's a call."
Yeah, in a heads-up situation.
Should be.
In a heads-up situation where they're facing a bet, and someone puts out any chip facing the bet,
right.
we always...
It would be totally different if there was a
situation like that.
1,000, if there was a 1,000 bet, then a 25,000 bet, and then a 1,000 bet. We would understand that.
It's the Australia rule. Somebody makes a bet, and the player throws a quarter chip out there, and it's a call. And it's the one chip thing. So the way that we rule it is in a heads-up situation, it's always a call facing a player. If it's in a multi-way, we'll obviously determine whether or not they're going to forfeit it, which 99 out of 100 times they're going to get that option. But in the heads-up situation, when they throw in the one chip, yes, we make them call.
Yeah, it's something that players have started doing, and so that's why they came with that rule.
All right, any necessary discussion on 39 here with methods of calling? Is everybody good with it as written? I couldn't hear what you said, Steve.
I think there was just a consensus that this is kind of universal, at least in Las Vegas, also in Reno. So what is going to be the effect of including this silently betting rule? It's non-standard, strongly discouraged, subject to penalty, but is anything going to change?
It was adopted in 2013 to discourage that type of betting because it's very unclear. The bet's 50,000, I throw out $1,000. Yeah, the TD's going to hold me to a call, but the problem was, and we were getting a lot of player complaints, it was one of the more irritating types of bets that they were seeing. Now, if you want to turn around and say, hey, that's an acceptable form of calling, throw out anything to any bet, but it's unlikely people are going to want that kind of.
I haven't seen any problems, and as I say, it seems to be universal, at least in the state of Nevada.
Yeah, I'm not sure we want to have the word subject to penalty because this has become an adopted practice. So.
Yeah, real quick here. I remember last TDA, one of the reasons why we had this in there also was because it was multi-way action. So we had a blind or a call, then we had a raise, and the other guy didn't. He called the 1,000. Oh, it's been raised, so he wasn't aware. So we're not just automatically going to make him call that 50,000 because he threw out one chip. So in a heads-up pot, you're right. Yeah, he's got to be a call. But if it's a multi-way pot, we need to keep that there for multi-way pots. You don't understand?
Sorry. So you're saying if I'm in a three-way pot on the river and someone goes all in for 50,000, and then there's one person behind me and I throw out 1,000, and then the person behind me goes all in, I'm allowed to fold?
No, what I'm saying is somebody bets 5,000,
yeah.
Then somebody else bets 20,000, and now I'm calling the 5,000.
Right.
I didn't see your $20,000 raise.
Sorry.
By this rule, if we made it a standard call, I would have to call your 50,000 or the 20,000. When I really was just trying to call the 5,000. So that's why when it's heads up, it's definitely a call there. But when it's a multi-way pot, player doesn't see a raise sometimes.
Are you going to address that you're going to go one way or the other with that, though? Seems like a pretty big pool.
I'm not really understanding what you're asking.
So if somebody puts in 5K, generally, if I throw a chip in, I'm calling. And I think that seems to be the general consensus. But it's saying here that it's going to be up to the tournament director, basically, subject to penalty, but.
Well,
doesn't seem very clear.
Well, that's basically, unless we clarify the language, the difference is the heads-up versus multi-way situation, and that's the tournament director's discretion. Is what that's. If I read that right, that's what it's addressing, right?
Part of the background in the undercall language, which you'd have to go back to 37. Yeah, 37, Part 3. The idea of an undercall was because the TDA was getting a lot of questions in 2011, 2012. When must a player call if they undercall, and when might they be allowed to forfeit the chip and fold? So that's what 37 on page 71, the B, it answers that question. That's when a TD might, at his or her discretion, say, okay, you can forfeit your bet and fold. So that's what that spells out. Now the token chip, where the guy bet 50,000 and the next player just throws out an obvious, just to toss out any single chip. The association wanted to discourage betting like that. Now, as you say, it's almost universally recognized as a call, but it's not the type of betting action that you want to encourage. Just say, when it's bet to you, when 10,000 is bet to you, throw out any amount you want. Who wants to institute that as typical betting, as normal betting? So that's why the language was put in to discourage people tossing out token coins or token chips when facing a bet. But those are two separate situations. In the first situation, they just got it wrong. They undercalled, they missed the bet. The TD may allow them to forfeit it and fold. On the other hand, when they deliberately toss out a token, they're going to be held to a full call, and that type of betting is going to be discouraged. in practice, it does go, like Chris says, it goes on a lot, and it's becoming maybe a little bit more in practice, but
for this rule happened to me about sorry guys, happened to me that in a three-way pot there is a bet of 5,000, raise 35,000, and the third guy asked to the dealer how much is the raise, and the dealer said 35,000, and he put 5,000. Of course, in this case, I forced him to call because he had the information from the dealer. In the other case, and is I guess our discretion is when he's bet 5,000, position 9, 1 sometimes doesn't help in this case. Put 35,000, dealer maybe didn't put the all-in button, or sorry, in this case was all-in and didn't mention all-in, but just put the chips, and the other guy put 5,000. In this case, if I follow the TDA, it's our discretion to come over to the table, take more information that we can from the dealer and from the players eventually, and maybe my decision will be to call only 5,000 to have to have the option to put the 5,000 and to lose if he fold, or to call and to add the 30K.
So is everyone clear on methods of calling and our interpretation of the multi-way versus single or heads up? Are there any necessary changes to that language? I understand, and I think that's it doesn't really say that, but that's part of the TD's discretion that's read into there. We discourage will be interpreted at TD's discretion, and it doesn't specifically spell that out, and I don't think we want to spell that out, because if we do, then we bind ourselves to that.
I think everybody understands intervening versus heads up. It's very simple. That's the difference.
All right, so yes, go Johnny, go. Methods of raising. A no limit or pot limit of raise must be made by A, pushing out the full amount in one motion, B, verbally declaring the full amount prior to pushing out chips, or C, verbally declaring raise prior to pushing out the exact amount to call, then completing the raise with one additional motion. In option C, if other than the exact call amount but less than a minimum raise is first put out, it will be ruled a minimum raise. It is players' responsibility to make their intentions clear. Any ambiguity there? Any necessary change or discussion on that? We will be discussing that later, I'm sure. That's actually coming up. Mike, you know the small blind discussion we had about the chips coming out? That's actually addressed later. Yes. Let's go to 41. Raise amounts. A raise must be at least the size of the largest previous bet or raise of the current betting round. If a player raises 50% or more of the previous bet but less than the minimum raise, he must make a full raise. If the raise will be exactly the minimum raise allowed, or the raise will be exactly the minimum raise allowed. If it's less than 50%, it's a call unless raise is first declared. You see the additional language that's put in over the 2013 portion. If less than 50% is a call, unless raise if first declared. So is everybody okay with the insertion of that language to clarify that rule?
If he puts less chips than he's supposed to, but says raise, it will be a raise. Very simple.
Okay. Reopening the bet. It says new rule, old rule was 41B, reopening the bet. In no limit and pot limit, an all-in wager of less than a full raise does not reopen the betting to a player who has already acted and is not facing at least a full raise when the action returns to him. In limit, at least 50% of a full raise is required to reopen betting for players who have already acted. Is everybody completely clear on that? Any necessary changes or discussion? All right. Oversized chip betting. When facing a bet or blind, pushing out a single oversized chip is a call. If raise is not first declared, to raise with an oversized chip, raise must be declared before the chip hits the table surface. If raise is declared but no amount, the raise is the maximum allowable for the chip. When not facing a bet, pushing out an oversized chip without declaration is a bet of the maximum for the chip. That's very standard and has been for quite some time. Any necessary discussion on that one? Okay. Multiple chip betting. When facing a bet, unless raise is declared first, a multiple chip bet is a call if every chip is needed to make the call. i.e. removal of just one of the smallest chips leaves less than the call amount. The example, pre-flop 2 and 400 blinds, A raises to 12 total, an $800 raise, or 800 chip raise. B puts out 2 $1,000 chips without declaring raise. This is just a call because removing either of the $1,000 chips leaves less than the amount required to call. If the single removal of just one of the smallest chips leaves the call amount or more, the bet is governed by the 50% standard in Rule 41 and see addendum. Is everybody under complete agreement, understanding, no discussion required on that one? Okay. Previous bet, chips not pulled in. This is the issue I think you were talking about, Steve, or something related. If a player faces a raise and has chips in front of him not yet pulled in from a prior bet, those chips and any change due may affect whether his betting response to the raise is a call or re-raise. Because several possibilities exist, players should declare their bets before putting out new chips on top of prior bet chips not pulled in. The discussion, can we standardize when silently adding new chips to prior chips as a call, and when's it a raise? We got to clarify that. And then your opinion on the next 3 cases are going to help establish the guidelines for a rule. New multiple chips are the trickiest. So here's on number 44, here are the cases. Silent over chip, is it always a call regardless of whether prior chips were pulled back? In no limit, 3 and 600 blinds, a big blind post with 2 500s. Under the gun raises to 2K total. Big blind, number 1, drops in a silent 5K chip. 2, pulls back 1 500 and drops a 5K chip. Or 3, pulls back both 500s and drops a 5K chip. Is it always a call? It'll take a minute to digest that. Read all 3 of those. It'll take a moment. But once again, the big blind drops a silent 5K chip there. Or pulls back one of the 500s and drops a 5K chip, or pulls back both 500s and drops a 5K chip. Are those significantly different actions, and are they always a call?
Yeah, I agree. 1 would be a call, 2 would be a raise, 3 would be a call. There'd be no reason for him to pull back one of the 500 chips and add a 5K chip and leave the other 500 chip out unless he was raising, right? Right.
Exactly. Ladies and gentlemen, just something to bear in mind on this rule. This is another one of these overnight rules. So you're going to really want to contemplate these cases tonight because they're sort of a brain tease, each one of these possible situations. So as you're thinking them through, just kind of be thinking what works. And the other thing about it is, if you just look at this overchip case, it's objectively the cleanest way is to say it's always a call. That's just simple. Now, but it might not be intellectually satisfying. You might say, hey, in case 2, wait a minute, the guy's making a point because he's leaving one of the 500s out there, he's pulling just one of them back, and then he's throwing the 5,000. So maybe he's making a point. I want to make this 55, even though he doesn't verbalize it. That's why the rules as it currently reads says you should verbalize your bet. But let's say they don't, and so they just pull one back and throw the 5,000. Intellectually, that may sound like 55,000, but now you're starting to complicate it. You're saying, okay, if I add an overchip here, it's a call. If I add it over there, it's a raise. And so you have to bear that. You have to weigh. Those are the pros and cons. Do I want it simple, clean, memorable, or do I want it more,
Yeah, the simplest and cleanest, like Mike says, is any of those situations, putting in a single oversized chip silently would be a call. That is very simple, but like he says, it doesn't really feel right because the person manipulated the chips already in the pot. So be thinking about these. Yes, sir.
I mean, if the player has taken back one of the 500 chips and then puts back a 5,000 chip, I just have to go by what he's done because I can't read his mind. I might be psycho, but I'm not psychic. So if he puts an oversized chip in without comment, it's a call. That's the rule that I say at the start of every tournament. Put an oversized chip in without comment, it's a call. So what has he done? He's put an oversized chip in without comment.
But why would he take the 500 off?
I don't care.
Well, I do.
Because I'm not going to try to read his mind. How many chips did he put out? Yeah, sure. How many chips did he put out? He put out 1 chip. 1. But how many chips did he put out? He put out 1 chip. And it's So, and that's what it is. It's
All right,
an
well-
oversized chip.
Well,
Put a chip in and just one and don't say nothing. That's what I'm going to do. Is it's going to be a call.
Sometimes you have to be reasonable, though. You have to look at it reasonably.
As opposed to going into a lengthy discussion about this specific case, let's discuss the others, and then, as we talked about, be thinking about those, and we'll come back and revisit tomorrow.
Hi,
Yes, sir.
this is Dan again at the bike. Just clarification on what the gentleman was just talking about. We use the definition of manipulating the chips. So in the second session, or second example, he did pull chips out of the pot, threw the extra one in, so there were 2 chips. In number 1, he didn't manipulate chips, oversized chip rule. In the second one, he pulled them back, but only threw an oversized chip in, so we go with the call on that one also. And I think that's the way that you have the rule written, is that correct? Call, raise, call?
And just to complicate things a little more, dealers, occasionally players make things easier for dealers and try to put in chips that help create the pot. So if the player had raised to 2,500, he took back a 500 and threw out an oversized chip. That would have helped the dealer create the pot, make change.
Where's that goes?
There it is. I couldn't see you back there, sorry. We're going to actually discuss the other 2 cases. Like I said, let's think about these, and then we'll revisit tomorrow and see if they're all calls, raises, etc. Second example, big blind posts, 3 and 6 blinds, no limit. Big blind posts with 2 500s with 400 change due. Under the gun raises a 2K total, 1,400 more to call. Big blind silently drops 2 1K chips onto the 2 500s. Has the big blind called 2K or raised? All right. If it's a call, this is option 2, see the following slides. If it's a raise, this is option 1, see the following slides. And then, let's see, the other previous bet case, no limit hold'em, 75, 150, the big blind post with 2 100s, $50 and change due. Under the gun raises to 1,300 total with 1150 more to the big blind. The big blind silently drops 2 1K chips onto the 2 100s. Has the big blind called 1,300 or raised? If it's a call, this is option 1, the next 2 slides. If it's a raise, this is option 2 on the next 2 slides. So what that's referring to is the next 2 slides are previous bet, new language option 1 would be, if there is.
That's the one you just read.
Yeah, I read all 3 cases. Right. All right, previous bet chips, new language option 1. If the prior chips do not cover the call, 1, a new over chip is always a call. 2, new multiple chips. If all new chips are needed to make a call, then it's a call. Otherwise, the total of all new and old chips is a raise if it meets the 50% standard in Rule 43. B, if the prior chips cover the call, the bet is the combined total of all new and prior chips and is a raise if it meets the 50% standard in Rule 43, if it's less than a call. And then on the next slide, we have an underlined difference. The previous bet chips, if the prior chips do not cover the call, 1, a new over chip is always a call. 2, if new multiple chips are added, the bet is the total of all new and old chips, and it's a raise if it meets the 50% standard in Rule 43. If it's less, it's a call. So the difference in language, if all new chips are needed to make the call, it is a call. That's the difference in these 2 options. B, if the prior new options cover the call, the bet's the combined total of all new and may be a raise if it meets the 50% standard in Rule 43. So once again, as stated before, go back and look at in each of those instances, think about what the differences are. Are those a call? Are they a raise? And then we can have greater discussion and probably a consensus build tomorrow. We're going to move on to 45. The number of allowable raises. There is no cap on the number of raises in a no limit and pot limit. In limit events, there is a limit to raises even when heads up until the tournament is down to 2 players. The house limit applies. That's universal and has been accepted for quite some time. Any discussion necessary on that one? Accepted action. Poker's a game of alert, continuous observation. It's a caller's responsibility to determine the correct amount of an opponent's bet before calling, regardless of what is stated by the dealer or players. If a caller requests a count but receives incorrect information from the dealer or players and places that amount in the pot, the caller is assumed to accept a full correct action and is subject to the correct wager or all-in amount. As with all tournament situations, Rule 1 may apply at TD's discretion. Everybody familiar with and aware about the accepted action? All right. Pot size and pot limit bets. Players are entitled to be informed of the pot size in a pot limit game only. Dealers will not count the pot in pot limit and no limit, declaring I bet the pot is not a valid. Dealers will not count the pot in limit and no limit, declaring I bet the pot is not a valid bet in no limit, but does bind the player to making a valid bet, at least a minimum bet, and may subject to a penalty. If the player is facing a bet, he must make a valid raise. Everybody clear on that? All right, string bets and raises. Dealers will call string bets and raises. 49, non-standard and unclear betting. Players use unofficial betting terms and gestures at their own risk. These may be interpreted to mean other than what the player intended. Also, whenever the size of a declared bet can be reasonably have multiple meanings, it will be ruled as the lesser value. Example, I bet 5. If it's unclear whether 5 means 500 or 5,000, the bet's going to stand as 500.
Let's stop. Kevin.
Something to say about that?
Whoa. Whoa. Ho, ho.
Okay.
Ho the dice.
We knew there'd be a discussion here.
All right.
Well, this is why I skipped work today, to be here for this rule. I think this is the worst rule ever written in poker, and it's a free angle shoot for any time anybody wants to. 2 weeks ago today in the Monster Stack event number 37 at the World Series, 2 and 400 blinds, level 7, average chip stack 30,000 in chips. We had a pot of about 14,000. A player who isn't familiar with English, knows single-digit numbers, but not familiar with thousands. He takes 2 5K chips and says 8. So I come over to the table. Obviously, it's not going to be 800. He's throwing out 2 5K chips, not one of them. Player at the table wanted it to be 800 because he wants to call for 8. Same table 10 minutes later because of this ruling.
First of all, that's okay.
What happened?
We're okay with that.
That wouldn't be right anyway.
We're okay with this one.
Okay.
So 10 minutes later, come back to the table. Same player, because he was frustrated because he got the floor called on him last time. 4 players pre-flop, 2,500 to go, 11,000 in the pot. He takes his 5K chip and he goes, 4, and sets it down. The only person in the world who thinks he was trying to bet 400 is the guy in the 5 suit who wants to call for 400. This is not good for the recreational player, as Matt Stout has said. What's not good for the recreational poker is bad for the game. I have a couple other instances, and here's the big problem with this rule. Dealers read the rules, but they don't understand the rules. I have seen 8 different times in 4 different properties all over the country where I catch players grabbing 5 1K chips, and they say 5 and are throwing 5 1K chips in the pot, and the dealer stops them and says, that's 500, because you said it after or before the chips hit the felt. I've seen this. It is affecting the action in the games. The dealers read it. They think they understand the rule. Now they're directing the action at the table.
So they call the floor and you say you put it
No. They aren't calling the floor. They're making the ruling in the box.
But that's dealer training. That's dealer training. That's
And not only that, it's up to the player that called the floor.
Yeah, that's not a TDA problem.
I understand. This is what I'm telling you is happening because of the rule. This is what is happening. Dealers everywhere are doing this. It's not something I get called over to make a floor decision. This is happening because I'm walking through and I hear a dealer doing this.
Here would be my stance on that. I don't know if anybody else agrees with me, but there's a word in there that is very, very clear for me. It says it can be reasonably interpreted to have multiple meanings. It says also whenever the size of a declared bet can be reasonably have multiple meanings. It would seem to me in every instance you've outlined, it wouldn't be reasonable for the player to bet 400 as opposed to 4,000 or 500 as opposed to 5,000. It's not reasonable they would do that. So as a TD, I'm going to reasonably decide that it's the larger one. I mean,
yes.
I don't think in the situations Kevin is talking about, it's reasonable to assume anything other than it was the larger of the two amounts.
No, but what I'm saying is your rule is stating that he doesn't have a choice but to rule it the lower of the two. That's the way I'm reading it, unless I'm reading it wrong.
That's the rule on an unclear bet. When somebody has 5 $1,000 chips in his hand and puts them in the pot, that's pretty clear.
I think he's referring to
But the dealer, the floors are not
5-4.
getting called in this situation.
the floors aren't
dealers
getting
are reading
called,
the
then
rule and
the-
making the rulings in the box.
But that's not.
That's the issue. That's
Yeah,
not the
not-
rule.
that's
It's the
not a
issue of the
problem.
dealers not calling the floor. That's your issue.
If the floor was called, even if the floor was called, on Kevin's thing where the guy puts up a 5K chip and says 4, the ruling according to this, and I've got no background with this whatsoever. The ruling here says it's a $400 bet.
Okay. It's
Just to clarify a little bit on the history of this rule, in 2011, there was no word reasonably. It just read, also, whenever the size of a declared bet can have multiple meanings, it will be ruled the so whenever it can have, it's going to go to the lower. Then in 2013, the word reasonably was introduced to try to address the kind of situations you're talking about. Now, whether it does it, the question is that enough?
I think you need to work on the wording, because to me, it's absolutely pointing to what makes 0 sense.
And it's a free angle shoot for any player who knows the rule, where the recreational player does not. Because he's going to call it over, and either the dealer is not going to call the floor, and he's saying, yes, it's only 500, or the floor is going to come over, who has read a junior floor, and read this. He's not going to be able to make that decision based on Rule 1, and he's going to say it's 500. So
what would you propose as a edit to that?
Waxy, you had something
like
happen.
the old rule. When
Waxy
the
had
action
something
was
happen.
established in thousands, it automatically became thousands. If the previous betting round had not been established in thousands, it was hundreds.
Kevin, give Waxy the thing.
Yeah, I agree with Kevin completely here. I've actually suffered both. But I've actually suffered the consequences of a dealer thinking that they were the floor and like making me bet 800 when I threw out 2 5K chips at the Hard Rock for like their big tournament, and I like lost a massive pot because I got hero called like for 800.
But why didn't you call for a floor when you
I
knew the
did call
decision
for the
was-
floor, and the floor came over and made the wrong ruling, and I lost the pot. And then on break, I went over to that floor and instructed him, like very nicely, why he was wrong. And then I went to his supervisor, and then it ended with them saying, "Yeah, you know what? You're right.
But
we were wrong.
that's
Sorry
not a
about
T-
losing that massive hand."
But that's not a TDA issue. That's an incorrect ruling
Sure.
issue.
Okay, but what I'm saying is what you guys need to do is you need to fix the verbiage like they're saying, and I think it's real simple. You just need to say that the bet amount that it's going to be considered is whatever size is closer to the size of the current pot. So for example, if the pot's 5,000 and they're if the pot's 5,000 and they're throwing out a 5K chip and they say 4 at the blinds 200, 400, then it's going to be considered 4,000 because that's closer to 5,000 than 400. So it's just real easy because odds are that the bet is going to be. I'm sorry?
Yeah, that's a great question. What if it's 2,000 and you throw a 5,000 out there? Because now we're in different. A 500 would be a quarter pot bet versus
What's
a
the size of the pot?
2,000.
The size of the pot's 2,000, and you say 4 throwing out a $5,000 chip. Well, then it would be 400. It would be 400.
There you go.
See, it's right in the middle,
The
though,
pot
Matt.
size is
Now you're
established in thousands, but you're going to be a
splitting hairs
$100
there,
bet.
buddy.
Well, is it right in the middle?
It's close enough. The thing is, it gives you
it's
pause.
1,600 away from 400 is 1,600 away
I
from
know,
2,000.
I'm not saying
honestly,
mathematically in the middle.
We're players, and we need to be responsible in this situation, and we need to know this, and we need to specify our amounts. So that's ultimately our responsibility. However, in this situation, like if I'm throwing out 2 5K chips, obviously I'm not trying to bet 800 chips.
Well, that's
so that's just like one situation where but like if it does become like as ambiguous as this is, then it should just be the bet size amount that's closer to the pot because it's the fairest way without angling.
And the alternative suggestion is once a pattern of betting has been established in increments of 1,000, once you've had a pattern established, that you wouldn't go back to, and the bet would cover 1,000, that you wouldn't go back to 100 just because it was possible.
So a player bets 2,000 on the flop. He gets a call. He bets 3,000 on the turn, gets a call in 1 in 200 blinds. And the river, he says 5. The other player snap calls, throws out a 5K, tables his hand. Now this player gets to say, oh, I only bet 200. No, 200. 1 in 200 or 5. He said 5, so 500.
If there's 4,000 in the pot, And there's still hundreds in play. Am I allowed to bet 400 though if I put 100 chips out there?
In the monster stack, they still had greens when this happened. And
I
they
might
still
try to
had
steal.
30K average
I might try to steal the pot. It might throw somebody off in their psychology, and they may all dump their hands, or might get it down between me and the best one, and then run him out for 2,000 the next round.
Yeah, but obviously when you have 12,000 in the pot, you've already bet 2 and 3 and 4,000, and then on the river you say 5, and the guy snap calls you with a 5K, and then you see you have a loser. Oh, I only bet 500. I only want to bet a smaller amount. But if I have him beat, of course I'm not going to say a word. I'm going to take his 5,000 chip. It's a free angle shoot.
One of the things in talking with a few players on break that was in reference to this, because this came up in the 50K as well, in a couple of hands, and was brought to us by Mike Sexton last night from some of those 50K players, was they understand we have to have a rule. We have. Something has to go to the floor and it's either, it could be the larger amount, the smaller amount, but we have to pick one or the other. The suggestion, and I'm not saying yes or no, I'm just bringing the suggestion, was it is the largest amount up to the amount of the pot. So if the pot's 6,000 and you throw out a 5K and say 5, it's going to be 5,000. But if the pot's 4,000 and you throw out a 5K and say 5, it's going to be 500. Again, that gets into weird wrinkles with counting the pot and no limit and stuff, but that was language that was suggested as if it doesn't exceed the pot, it's the maximum allowable amount of the chip.
I wouldn't object to that. It takes away the angle shoot.
The problem with this discussion, it seems to me, is that we're making it too complicated. While we can guess what the intention is of a savvy player, he's obviously not going to bet $600 into a $5,000 pot. He's more likely to overbet the pot. But we have to do something that is simple, where we're going to get the most good outcomes by floor people, maybe traveling floor people, maybe your floor person who was out too late last night, whatever. But we're trying to simplify the rules so that we can get correct rulings, even if the rule maybe have some wiggle room. We can't have people guessing what the intention was, even though it's obvious, like a string bet. You know the guy meant to raise it, but a string bet is a string bet, and therefore we call it. So simplify it for us, Kevin.
That's why the previous betting round is what cures it. If the bet was 800 on the previous betting round on the flop, and you say 8 on the turn, it's 800. If the previous betting round was raised to 3,000, and you say 5, now it's going to be a 5,000 bet. That's the way we used to always do it. Worked much better. But now that the dealers read this rule, they think, oh, this is a simple rule. I know this one. You know, it happens. You're not even going to hear about it. You're not going to get called over on a lot of these. The dealers are making rulings.
Whatever we agreed to here today, it's going to be very important that staff is instructed properly. And this might be one of the pre-tournament things that a floor person or the DC or whoever discusses with the dealers until it becomes regular. The things about like first card, last card, once your house has established the precedent, that's what you do. You don't have to discuss it. But having the dealers read the rules and understand them correctly, look at how much trouble we're having understanding these rules and coming to a consensus. So a dealer who's going from house to house that may or may not use TDA rules, we can't rely on that as being, the fault of a TDA. We need the tournament directors to instill upon the dealers the importance of understanding or asking the question.
I absolutely agree with that.
And here's
There's
one
a
way
difference
that,
between being able to read the rule and understand what the rule and how to apply the rule. That's the difference between a floor supervisor.
It would
and
appear the wording is going to be the challenge. And Linda, why don't you have your genius work up a way to make it so it's...
Why don't some of you guys who feel passionate about this also come up with some wording, give it to us tonight, email it to us, whatever, so we can kick it around, come up with a couple of proposed things tomorrow while so many of you will still be here, and we can see what works well for us.
and we have 2 good suggestions on the table, so we could come back and really pick up with this rule tomorrow and give this some thought. At the very end, we can say see illustration addendum and put a couple of illustrations of what you might be able to measure the bet against to have a standard of reasonableness. Whether you're going to measure it against the pot size, as Neil suggested,
or
perhaps against the sequence of betting in certain increments. As
I think, but the multiple chip bet has to not be a part of this because that we already know what the rule is.
I think you absolutely need to have a wording that's going to go with the pot size. The closest amount to a pot size. If somebody puts out
But now we're counting a pot in a no-limit game.
Well, if the pot's 4,000 and somebody throws out a $5,000 chip, the ruling's going to have to be 400 per this rule. Now, I think it's way more likely that the bet would be 5,000 than 400, right?
it's more likely, but what if a guy is trying to make a min bet? Now you're going to make him bet more than he...
But then he needs to...
More important,
I
maybe,
think-
to train the players to state what it is they want to
Exactly.
do. And I'm taking off the table the gentleman whose English was a fourth language. And maybe we're going to cut that person some slack because in that case we can read what his intention was. But wouldn't it be
100%.
easier after we figure out what this rule is to really get our players trained to verbalize their bets so we don't have to make these difficult decisions? No, of course we cannot train. Absolutely, but
I just think the
absolutely,
rule
but
would be
getting the players
clearer.
to state their intention is never a bad thing.
The rule would probably be easier to decipher for the floor people if it was the closer amount to the pot or whatever. The wording is above me. But I just think that when you take away the ability for somebody to angle shoot a $400 bet into a $4,000 pot, I think 5,000 is way likelier as a bet. I think if you come up with some wording that would get it closer to that, you're going to be better off.
But it also could be more punitive to somebody who really did intend the smaller amount. We've just discussed this a little bit up here, and we are open certainly to changing this if we have a consensus what the people want. I mean, we just don't want to put it into a tournament director's hand to try to guess or to assume what the player's intention was. And that's why the simplification of the rule before was to go with a lesser amount. But we're happy to find a better way.
All right, well,
With good
how
wording.
about if we would train our dealers?
Who's talking?
Oh, thank you. Okay, what if we would train our dealers to maybe clarify what the intention is before allowing the action to continue?
Old fashioned, we used to do that 20, 30 years ago. When a player would say 5, you'd say 100 or 1,000.
Right. And that's fine.
Now we're trying to have a rule to cover it. And the rule as written this way, which was designed in the best interest, but it has opened up angles. And I'm seeing these angles all over.
And asking a player to clarify something, if it's done instantaneously, is a perfect world. And on the rare times that it happens that way, great. But so often, it doesn't happen until it's gone fold, and now the next player says, well, is that 100 or 1,000? Well, now it's too late because the guy's gained information. So
It's always on the single-digit declaration.
Well,
or also, somebody quit calls under the old rule.
Because nobody bets 1,000.
Well, as Mike suggested, why don't we maybe try to come up with some language or some suggestions? It looks like we have two pretty valid suggestions there, either previous betting round or something close to pot size. Let's come up with some type of suggestions on verbiage or something, send them to Mike, and then we can actually revisit this tomorrow and maybe form a consensus on it if we want to change.
That was the suggestion that I had earlier today that I was talking to the people up here about, that if the pot was smaller than the single chip that was thrown in, then it would be the lower amount, and if it was more, then it would be the higher amount. And I think that would simplify it. May mean that the dealer's counting pots, but I don't think it's very difficult to count a 5K pot if you throw out a 5K chip. It's not going to be that difficult to do, so something else to think about.
What about the guy that actually wants to...
Huh?
You still have that situation.
No, I don't agree with that at all. You can't force them to bet 5,000.
Yeah, but I mean, if it's more common that someone's going to bet
Okay,
5,000
that's-
into
that's-
4,700 than 500.
That's unclear. That's unclear.
Not in a seniors tournament and not in a ladies tournament. The demographics could make a big difference on what the intention was. I mean, we hear what you're saying, absolutely. We're all players up here too, even though a lot of you don't think we are. But we hear what you're saying. Well, that's why I'm saying, in a perfect world, if they're asked immediately, but so often they're not asked immediately, it's got to be. And meanwhile, there's been a call and a fold and a fold and a call, and now someone says, well, wait a minute, did he bet 5,000 or 500? And of course, you can go to accepted action there, but suppose there's only been one action behind. It has to have, if dealers were perfect and dealers did their job perfectly, a lot of these things wouldn't happen. Of course, then we wouldn't be here having all this fun. But
I mean, ultimately, like, this just all goes back to the first rule of saying that the TDs need to be able to make their own educated decision. So, like, if you have a 500 chip and you throw out a 5K chip into a pot of 4,300, it's 5,000. Like, obviously, they could have thrown a 500 chip if they wanted to, and they say 5, and they're adamant that they wanted to make it 5, and they're like, they're not saying, like, oh, I thought that was a 500 chip. Like, that's 5,000. And, like, just, you can tell by, like, just weighing a few factors, like, the size of the pot and like the stack that the player who bet has in front of them. And I don't think it should ever happen. Like,
But Matt, whose fault is it? Whose fault is it that it would be a $500 bet? No, it's the player. It's the player not announcing
it's
a
always
correct
the
bet.
it's always the player's fault.
It is in that kind of a situation. And if it does, usually it falls on the lower end, just because we don't know. It's a vague bet.
Absolutely, but I think that in specific situations when it coincides with the flow of the game, like
I agree. I know what's happening. I know what he wanted to
Then
bet,
if someone does want to
right?
like even if everyone at the table thinks it's 5,000 except for one person, and then the floor comes over, I just think they need to be prepared to make the correct decision.
All right, well, it's always going to be the person who's facing that bet. You know, I mean, that's usually the issue.
Well, can we go ahead and we've got enough examples to base some illustrations on. We'll pick this up in the morning. We do have the next presenters that need to come on, so.
Also, we do have Daniel Negreanu is going to stop by right after this, and he has something that he'd like to add to the summit as well. So if you'd like to hear him, he's going to be right after this presentation. And that'll wrap it up for the day. So come on up, IFP.